Hi everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. Moonlight filtered through swaying pine trees, turning the forest path into a stretch of silver and shadow. Every rustle in the underbrush seemed amplified, each whisper of wind against branches echoing like a distant, disembodied sigh. Lena Rivers was no stranger to this particular route. She had walked the trail countless times after her evening shifts at a small roadside grill on the outskirts of town. It was easier to cut through the fringe of the woods than to follow the serpentine main road that wound back toward the lights of civilization. Normally, the darkness did not bother her, but tonight felt different. A strange tension charged the air, and a disquieting awareness prickled at the back of her neck. She paused, letting her eyes drift across the looming silhouettes of trees. In her 20 years, she had cultivated a steady resilience, shaped by a childhood spent wishing for answers to questions she never dared to voice. She had never met her father, and her mother died when Lena was too young to grasp the magnitude of that loss. Raised by a succession of foster families and relatives with only tenuous connections to her mother's memory, Lena learned early how to be self-sufficient. Yet there was a certain emptiness she could not shake, a feeling that perhaps she was meant for something she could not name. The only person who had offered any insight into her past was a former friend of her mother's, a woman named Nancy, who sometimes made vague references to Lena's father. But these references were always cloaked in a hush of caution, as though speaking of him too freely might invite misfortune. Nancy refused to supply details, especially regarding the rumors that surrounded Lena's birth. Lena had never believed in superstitions, and yet, alone on this moonlit path, those old tales throbbed in her mind like an unhealed wound. A brisk wind carried the distant scent of wet earth, and the undergrowth quivered. Lena picked up her pace, hugging her arms to her chest. She was tall and lean, with a wiry strength that came from long shifts bussing tables and lugging heavy boxes of supplies in the back of the grill. She wore her brown hair loose, the wavy strands brushing against her jacket collar. Her steps quickened as a low, mournful howl sounded from somewhere deeper in the forest. It was not unusual to hear wild canines at night, but something about that howl made her heart lurch. She shoved her hands into her pockets, touching the small pepper spray canister she always carried. If some feral animal showed up, she wanted to be ready, although she was not entirely sure how effective pepper spray would be against a wolf. A fleeting memory crossed her thoughts, a childhood dream in which she ran under a silver moon, powerful and free, with no fear of the dark or the wild creatures that roamed it. She shook off the memory, attributing it to the swirl of anxiety stirring in her gut. A branch snapped to her left. She stopped abruptly, her breath catching. The silence after the crack felt unnaturally heavy, as though the forest were holding its breath. Slowly, she turned her head, scanning for any sign of movement. Her eyes strained in the half-light, trying to discern shapes from the shadows. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then a large figure detached itself from the darkness, stepping onto the path a short distance ahead of her. It was a wolf, but bigger than any she had seen in wildlife documentaries. Its coat was a mottled gray, ragged around the shoulders, and its eyes glowed with an unsettling light. A shiver coursed through Lena. Her instincts told her to run, but logic froze her in place. Wolves rarely attacked humans unprovoked, she reminded herself, but this one looked anything but timid. It bared its teeth, lips curling in a silent snarl. Slowly, it advanced, massive paws pressing into the damp earth. She fumbled in her pocket for the pepper spray, but her hand trembled so violently she nearly dropped it. Her heart hammered, each beat resonating in her ears. Something about the wolf's gaze gripped her, the shape of its eyes far too cunning, too calculating for a simple wild beast. She raised the pepper spray. Before she could muster the courage to release it, a sharp growl resonated behind her. She whirled around in time to see another figure dart from between the trees, this one on 2 legs, but moving with the fluidity of a predator. The stranger's stance bristled with raw power, and even in the dimness, Lena caught the flash of silver in his eyes. He had dark hair and wore a fitted jacket that stretched over broad shoulders, giving the impression of controlled might. "Get back!" he shouted, the resonance of his voice both commanding and protective. The wolf snarled in response, whipping its head to face this newcomer. Lena stood petrified, pepper spray still clutched in her hand, unsure whether to aim at the wolf or the man. The tension in the air crackled, and for a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. Then the wolf lunged, jaws snapping with violent intent. The man met its attack without hesitation, grappling the wolf mid-leap. The two of them collided in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the forest floor. Dirt and dried leaves scattered, illuminated by the pale moonlight. Lena watched in horror and awe as the stranger wrestled the wolf with an inhuman force, as though he were more than an ordinary man. He drove his forearm against the wolf's neck, pinning it momentarily. The wolf twisted, snapping viciously, but the man somehow evaded the fangs. She wanted to help, but did not know how. Another growl sounded from her left, and she realized a second wolf was prowling toward her. This one was smaller but equally menacing, bearing the same eerie glow in its eyes. Panic tightened her chest. She raised the pepper spray, nearly dropping it again in her haste to aim. The wolf sprang forward. She squeezed the nozzle, spraying a burst of chemical into the night air. It struck the wolf's snout, eliciting a furious yelp. The beast shook its head, eyes watering from the sting. It was enough of a distraction to give Lena a chance to scramble backward. Her back hit a tree trunk, the impact jolting through her. Heart pounding wildly, she glanced toward the stranger, who managed to subdue the first wolf. Incredibly, he forced it onto its side, pressing a forearm into its ribs. The second wolf, still reeling from the pepper spray, paced a tight circle, snarling in fury. The man caught Lena's eye, his voice ragged when he shouted, "Run! Now!" Instead of immediately obeying, she fought a wave of fear and tried to stand her ground, pepper spray at the ready for another blast. The smaller wolf snarled again, and she sprayed a second burst, driving it a few paces off. Meanwhile, the man delivered a powerful blow to the larger wolf's muzzle, stunning it. Freed from its thrashing, he sprang to his feet and turned to the second wolf. Under the silvery moon, he moved with a deadly grace, fists striking hard and true. The second wolf's aggression vanished, replaced by a moment of caution, as though it recognized an adversary far more dangerous than it had anticipated. With a final, savage growl, the smaller wolf turned and bolted into the darkness, vanishing between the trees. The larger wolf snapped at the air in protest, then limped after its packmate, blood matting the fur near its shoulder. Lena sucked in a shaky breath, adrenaline pulsing in her veins. Her gaze locked onto the stranger, who stood panting, blood dripping from a gash on his forearm. She wanted to thank him, but her thoughts were chaotic, stumbling over confusion and fear. Slowly, she lowered the pepper spray, her trembling hand leaving an afterimage in the moonlit air. He glanced at the blood on his arm, then back at her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice edged with worry. She shook her head, unable to find her voice for a moment. Eventually, she managed. "No, I don't think so. Just, what were they?" He wiped his brow, eyes narrowing. Rogues. Or at least, wolves that have allied themselves with no recognized pack. Her mind swirled. Rogues? What does that even mean? The stranger regarded her carefully, silver eyes catching the moonlight as if reflecting it back. He seemed to weigh whether to explain or not. Finally, he spoke with an undercurrent of urgency. Those were not ordinary wolves. They're shapeshifters, werewolves without a proper pack to anchor them. They're dangerous because they have no leadership, no law. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it, that the memory of the snarls and the savage attack chilled her. Werewolves? You expect me to believe you saw it with your own eyes, he interrupted, tone grim. Their aggression was not normal. You know that. A swirling sense of unreality threatened to envelop her. She pressed her free hand to her chest, feeling her racing heartbeat. She had believed her night would end with a typical commute home, not a supernatural onslaught. But why would they come after me? She asked in a trembling whisper. He studied her, a flicker of intensity in his gaze. Because you're special, Lena. More than you realize. Her mouth went dry. How do you know my name? He exhaled, pressing his good hand to the gash on his arm in an attempt to stem the bleeding. That's complicated. Can you walk? We need to get off this path before they regroup. She nodded, though her legs felt shaky. She tightened her grip on the pepper spray, taking measured steps toward the clearing. He guided her forward, his posture protective, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The looming pine trees seemed to close in around them, their spindly branches creating ghostly patterns on the forest floor. They emerged from the denser brush onto a small dirt road wide enough for a vehicle. The moon illuminated the tire tracks that snaked through the clearing, weaving deeper into the wilderness. Parked next to a battered signpost was a sleek SUV, tinted windows reflecting the night sky. A second man waited there, posture stiff with tension. He had sandy blonde hair and a lean frame, dressed in dark clothing that blended into the forest. Upon seeing them, the blonde man jogged over, his eyes flicking anxiously from Lena to the stranger's injured arm. "What happened?" he demanded, though a worried softness underlined his words. The dark-haired stranger grimaced. "Rogues. They caught her unawares on the path." The blond man cursed under his breath, then turned to Lena with a concerned expression. "Did you get hurt?" Lena shook her head again. Her heart still hammered from the sheer violence she had just experienced, and her mind whirled with disbelief. "I'm fine. I don't understand what's going on." The two men exchanged a look of shared hesitation. Finally, the dark-haired stranger glanced at the blond man, gave a small nod, and then addressed Lena. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we have to move quickly. More could be lurking around." She noticed the blood still trickling down his arm. "You're hurt," she pointed out, the concern in her voice surprising even herself. He brushed it off. "It'll heal. I'm not human either." His words struck her like a jolt of lightning. If the wolves were werewolves, was he saying he was one too? But before she could delve further, the blond man opened the SUV's back door. "Please get in. We'll explain everything, but not here." Lena hesitated, torn between fear and the sense that she might be safer with these strangers than alone in the woods. The memory of the wolves' snarls, the gleam of their unnatural eyes weighed on her. She took a step toward the SUV. "Okay," she murmured, though her voice quivered. The dark-haired stranger followed, wincing slightly as he moved his injured arm. Once they were all inside, the blond man started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing towering pines and dense undergrowth. The vehicle rumbled over the uneven dirt road, leaving the moonlit clearing behind. The drive stretched in tense silence for several minutes, Lena stared out the window, trying to calm her racing thoughts. With each passing second, the reality of what she had witnessed became harder to ignore. Those wolves were not natural creatures. She had seen them shift, their eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. And the man who saved her had shown uncanny strength and reflexes beyond human limits. Eventually, she cleared her throat. "So," she began, voice unsteady, "you said my name, and you seem to know me. How? And why would werewolves, rogue werewolves, be after me?" The dark-haired man twisted in his seat to face her. Moonlight touched his features through the window, highlighting a strong jaw and sharp cheekbones. "My name is Gabriel," he said softly. "This is Everett." He gestured to the blonde driver, who offered her a quick nod in the rearview mirror. "We're from a pack that has been searching for someone. An heir." She gave him a baffled look. "An heir? Is that supposed to be me? That's impossible." Gabriel's expression was difficult to read, a mixture of patience and urgency. "Not impossible," he replied. "You're the daughter of an alpha, and not just any alpha. Your father is Marcus Rivers, and he leads one of the oldest werewolf packs in this region." Her heart lurched painfully at the name Rivers, her own last name. She had never known her father's identity, and rarely heard mention of him. She wanted to deny the possibility outright, but the memory of the wolves attacking her and Gabriel's extraordinary abilities made it difficult to do so. "My father is a werewolf," she whispered, more to herself than to them. Everett guided the SUV onto a narrow paved road, the forest receding slightly. "Yes," he answered, "and you, by blood, share that lineage." Lena felt a rising panic. She had lived 2 decades of life without any hint of having inhuman ancestry. Memories buzzed through her mind, fleeting moments when she felt a strange pull toward the moon, or an unexplainable surge of energy when she was emotional. She had always dismissed those sensations as figments of an overactive imagination, but now they took on a frightening new significance. Gabriel turned his gaze to the front windshield, as though searching for the right words. "Your mother was human, a strong and caring soul who tried to protect you from this world. There were rumors of a prophecy, one that put you at great risk. So your father agreed to keep your existence a secret, hoping you could grow up away from pack politics and rivalries." She swallowed hard, chest tight with conflicting emotions. Anger flared momentarily. "He just abandoned me? Left me to fend for myself, without ever telling me who or what I am?" A pained look flickered across Gabriel's face. "He did it out of love and necessity. The threat against you was too great. If you stayed with the pack, you would have been the first target for any enemy seeking to cripple your father's leadership." Lena sank back against the seat, overwhelmed. In the darkness of the SUV, the hum of the engine felt distant and unreal. She let out a shaky breath. "So if I'm this secret heir, why are these rogue werewolves hunting me now?" Everett cleared his throat. "Because word has finally leaked out that you exist. We're not sure how, but once that information got into the wrong hands, anyone with a grudge against your father saw a prime opportunity. If they capture you, they can leverage you against him, or even force a conflict that would destabilize his pack." Gabriel nodded, continuing the explanation. "We believe some factions are stoking rogue werewolves, encouraging them to cause chaos. They might have promised rewards or territory if they bring you in." Lena's stomach lurched at the thought of being used as a pawn in a supernatural power struggle. She rubbed her arms, chilled despite the warmth in the car. "And I suppose now you two are taking me to him?" "Yes," Gabriel said. Marcus asked us to find you, bring you to safety, and protect you from these rogue attacks. He needs you, Lena. The pack is in turmoil, and your presence could change everything." Though she felt a swirl of resentment toward this father she had never known, curiosity and a strange sense of longing also stirred deep within her. She wanted answers, and she needed to understand the powers that might lie dormant within her. Still, she tried to gather the fragments of her rational mind. "What if I say no?" Gabriel's shoulders tensed. "That is your right, but you would be in constant danger, hunted by people who see you as a valuable bargaining chip. At least with us, you'll have a fighting chance. And if you decide not to claim your birthright, that's a decision you can make from a secure position." She bit her lip, weighing her limited options. Running and hiding on her own seemed foolish when she knew nothing about the enemies pursuing her. Nor did she understand her own potential. She glanced at the forest outside, noticing how the moonlight illuminated the tops of the pines like a pale, shimmering halo. A memory of the wolves' teeth, their unnatural fury, made her shudder. "I'll go," she finally said, resignation in her voice. "But I want to meet him on my terms, and I want answers." Gabriel gave a small nod, relief flickering in his eyes. "You deserve them. We'll make sure you have all the answers you want, as best as we can provide." Silence settled in the SUV, broken only by the occasional creak of the leather seats and the hum of the tires. Lena turned her gaze inward, remembering her mother's face, the soft lullabies she used to sing. Had her mother known all along that Lena inherited a werewolf legacy? Questions spiraled through her, each one more daunting than the last. Everett guided the vehicle along another winding road that led higher into the foothills. The terrain became rugged, with rocky outcroppings and towering evergreens lining the path. Fog rolled in, wisps of it clinging to the ground like restless spirits. The moon still hung in the sky, casting enough light to reveal a large estate perched among the trees. Even in the darkness, Lena could see the tall wrought iron gate, flanked by stone pillars. Gabriel leaned forward in his seat, tapping on a code panel near the dashboard. The gate swung open with a groan, revealing a curving driveway that ended at a sprawling lodge. Warm lights glowed from the windows, creating a stark contrast to the cold forest around it. Lena felt her pulse quicken. Somewhere in that lodge was the father she had never known. She wondered how a moment so surreal could also feel like stepping toward a destiny that had been patiently waiting in the shadows. As the SUV pulled up, she caught sight of people milling about outside the lodge's entrance. Some stood on the porch, arms crossed, talking in hushed voices. Others wandered in the courtyard, their eyes reflecting an eerily keen awareness of the newcomers. Lena had never seen so many people move with that quiet, predatory grace. "They're part of the pack," Gabriel explained as he opened his door. "We maintain this property as our stronghold, somewhere secure and hidden from prying eyes. Everyone here is loyal to Marcus. They'll be loyal to you, too, once they confirm your identity." Lena swallowed, stepping out of the SUV. The crisp mountain air chilled her lungs, and the scent of pine mixed with something sharper, a primal musk that made her skin tingle with both unease and a strange sense of familiarity. A few of the onlookers lifted their heads, sniffing the breeze as though catching her scent. She suppressed a shiver at how wolf-like they appeared in their demeanor, even while in human form. Everett led the way up the wooden steps, greeting a couple of pack members with curt nods. Gabriel lingered at Lena's side, subtly positioning himself between her and the curious onlookers. When they reached the wide front door, he pushed it open, revealing a spacious foyer with polished floors and a broad staircase. The scent of wood polish and aged leather wafted through the air. Portraits and paintings lined the walls, though Lena did not have time to examine them closely as Gabriel ushered her further inside. Her thoughts jostled as a tall figure came into view at the end of a hallway. He had dark hair streaked with silver at the temples and a presence that seemed to fill the space around him. Broad-shouldered, his posture commanding, he possessed an intensity in his gaze that made her pulse flutter. He approached slowly, eyes never leaving Lena's face. "Marcus." Gabriel addressed him respectfully, dipping his head. Everett did the same, stepping aside. Marcus's gaze moved over Lena with an unreadable expression, though a flicker of something akin to pain or longing crossed his features. He paused, voice low. "Lena." She stared back, heart pounding so hard she worried it might burst from her chest. Though she had no concrete memories of him, a bizarre sense of recognition danced at the edges of her mind, like a melody she had heard long ago but could not place. She opened her mouth to speak, but found no words. After a moment of charged silence, Marcus exhaled. "You are home," he said quietly. "I know this must feel like a shock, and I am sorry it had to happen this way." Anger and confusion mingled in Lena's chest. She clenched her fists, trying to regain control of her voice. "Why?" she managed, her tone trembling with both vulnerability and resentment. "Why did you leave me out there, alone, if you were always here?" His shoulders sagged under the weight of her question. "I made a difficult choice to keep you hidden, one that tore me apart every day. Your mother and I wanted to protect you from a prophecy that foretold danger for our bloodline. We agreed the best way was for you to live a normal human life, away from me and away from the attention of our enemies." Lena's eyes stung. She wanted to reject his explanation, to cling to the resentment that had built up over years of not knowing him. But she also felt an echo of her mother's warmth in his presence, as if some intangible bond connected them, despite the lost time. She took a breath, fighting to steady herself. "And now that prophecy is catching up to me, right?" Marcus inclined his head. "It is. The rogues have already made attempts, as you experienced. My pack stands at a crossroads, threatened by hostile forces within our own kind and by outsiders who sense weakness. The prophecy warned that a child of two worlds, one human parent, one werewolf parent, would wield the power to either unite the pack or usher in its downfall." A hush seemed to settle in the hall, every sound muted by the gravity of his words. Lena's chest tightened. She felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her, new and suffocating. She had never asked for this. She had never even dreamed that such a world existed. Gabriel and Everett moved discreetly aside, sensing the need for privacy. Marcus gestured toward a side room, a cozy study lined with bookshelves. Inside was a large stone fireplace with embers glowing faintly. He offered a seat to Lena on a plush armchair while he took another across from her. The quiet crackle of burning wood broke the tension in the silence. "If this prophecy is about me, why keep me in the dark?" she demanded, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. "Couldn't I have prepared for it, or at least known the risks?" Marcus rubbed his forehead, as though the strain of past decisions weighed heavily on him. "We believed ignorance was the greatest protection. If you did not know, you would not use your powers, and your existence would remain a secret. At least, that was the plan until recently, when rumors surfaced that I had a hidden daughter." Lena pressed her lips together, absorbing his explanation. She glanced around the study, noticing a faint smell of old parchment and the patina of countless tomes that lined the shelves. It felt strange to sit here, in this world of werewolves and ancient legacies, and realize she had a place in it. "This is too much," she whispered eventually, closing her eyes. "What exactly do you expect me to do?" Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I do not expect you to shoulder this alone. My enforcers, my beta, and the pack elders have been working tirelessly to strengthen our territory and root out the rogues. But your presence could be the stabilizing factor we need. There is something about your dual heritage that might tip the balance, an untapped potential the prophecy spoke of." She remembered the unreal strength Gabriel displayed, the terrifying power of the rogue wolves, and tried to imagine possessing something comparable. Her chest tightened at the thought of so much responsibility. "So you want me to become, what, a warrior for the pack? I am not even sure I believe in werewolf powers, never mind how to use them." A soft knock on the doorframe made them look up. Gabriel stepped into the study, his injured arm now bandaged. With him was a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and a guarded expression. This newcomer held himself with a certain authority, a coiled tension in his posture. "Marcus," Gabriel said quietly, "this is Ronan. He is," Marcus nodded, "my top enforcer." Ronan's gaze flicked to Lena. In that moment, she felt an electric jolt, as if the air between them sparked with an unspoken connection. He dipped his head in a gesture of respect to Marcus, then shifted his attention back to Lena. "I have heard about you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Welcome to the pack, even if the circumstances are difficult." She tried to swallow her nerves, noticing how his gaze was intense but not unkind. There was something guarded in his dark eyes, as though he had seen countless battles and carried the weight of them in his soul. "Thank you," she managed, not sure what else to say. Marcus stood, crossing the room to place a hand on Ronan's shoulder. "I trust no one more than Ronan to ensure your safety, Lena. He has been my enforcer for years, and he will be your protector now that you are here." A conflicting swirl of emotions churned within her. She was equal parts relieved to have someone capable watching over her, and unsettled by the sudden intimacy of it all. "I appreciate the help, but I have a mind of my own," she said, her tone more assertive than she intended. "I won't be anyone's burden or prisoner." Ronan's lips twisted into a faint smile. "If you knew what kind of threats are circling, you might welcome a bodyguard, but rest assured, I will not be intrusive unless necessary. I follow your father's orders, but I also respect your boundaries." Marcus gestured for Gabriel to join them as well. The group formed a small circle in the warm glow of the fireplace. Lena felt the intensity of their collective gazes and realized, with a jolt, that her presence here was not just about one person's safety. It was about the survival of an entire pack. "Get some rest," Marcus finally told her, his voice filled with cautious concern. "We have a guest room prepared. In the morning, we will discuss everything in more detail, including the changes you may begin to experience." Her stomach flipped at the mention of changes, but she was too drained to argue further. Exhaustion weighed on her, both physically and emotionally. "All right," she murmured, rubbing her temples. Gabriel led her out of the study and down a quiet corridor where the walls were adorned with paintings of forests, mountains, and, in some cases, wolves howling at moonlit skies. He opened a door near the end, revealing a cozy bedroom furnished with a wooden bed, a soft rug, and heavy drapes that blocked out most of the moonlight. "If you need anything, I will be close by," Gabriel said, his voice gentler now. "Ronan will probably do rounds, making sure the perimeter is secure. Try to sleep. Tomorrow is a new start for you." She managed a nod, stepping inside. The door closed behind her, leaving her in unfamiliar silence. The events of the night swirled in her mind. The attack, her father's revelations, the cold shock of stepping into a world she never thought could be real. She kicked off her shoes, allowing herself a brief moment to collapse onto the bed. Tears threatened at the edges of her vision, a mix of relief that she was alive and fear of the unknown future. She curled up under a thick blanket, inhaling the scent of lavender from the sheets. Slowly, her heartbeat steadied, and despite her racing thoughts, weariness pulled her under. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, unaware of the watchful eyes standing guard outside her room. Far beyond the lodge, in the darkened forest, shapes moved in restless agitation. Rogues prowled at the edges of territory they had no right to claim, driven by the promise of power if they delivered the Alpha's hidden daughter. The night air reverberated with their low growls, hungry for chaos. But inside the pack's stronghold, Lena was safe. For now. Early morning light filtered through a gap in the drapes, soft and diffused, gently prodding Lena into wakefulness. At first, she forgot where she was, and the unfamiliar room stirred a flicker of panic. Then the memories rushed back, from the rogue wolves to her father's stern visage and the crowd of werewolves who had greeted her arrival. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and slid out of the bed, limbs still heavy. Her jacket was crumpled on a nearby chair, and her phone, miraculously still in her pocket, had died at some point during the night. She located a power outlet and plugged it in, biting her lip at the realization she had not contacted Nancy or anyone else who might worry about her sudden disappearance. Yet how could she possibly explain her abrupt departure with men she barely knew, to a place she did not understand? A quiet knock at the door made her tense. She opened it a crack to find a young woman with auburn hair and a kind smile, carrying a tray of breakfast items, toast, eggs, fresh fruit, and a mug of tea. "Good morning," the woman said softly. "I am Clara. Marcus asked me to bring you something to eat. I thought you might like some tea as well." "Oh," Lena replied, stepping aside to let Clara enter. "Thank you. That is really nice of you." Clara set the tray on a small table near the window, then turned, her gaze warm and reassuring. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we are all here to help. If you need anything, do not hesitate to ask." As Clara walked out, Lena exhaled. The idea of a werewolf pack was so alien, yet the courtesy reminded her that these people were also human, at least in part, and they had created a community with its own norms and kindnesses. The tantalizing smell of breakfast made her stomach grumble, and she realized how hungry she was after such a tumultuous night. She sat down and began to eat, letting the warmth of the tea soothe her nerves. Halfway through her meal, she heard another knock. Expecting Clara's return, she opened the door. But it was Marcus, standing tall in the hallway. A complicated swirl of emotions knotted in her stomach: resentment, curiosity, a fledgling sense of longing. "May I come in?" he asked quietly, noticing the half-eaten tray of food. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered, his demeanor subdued, as though uncertain of how to approach her. She gestured for him to sit in a chair across from the bed, while she took her place near the window. "How did you sleep?" he asked, his tone polite yet tinged with genuine concern. "All right, I guess," she answered, setting down the mug. She studied his face, noticing faint lines near his eyes, a weariness that spoke of years spent in conflict or worry. She wondered if those lines had deepened because of her. "I still do not know how to feel about all this." He nodded, folding his hands in his lap. "I understand. I wanted to give you time. but there is much to discuss. The pack elders will want to meet you, and I would like you to sit in on a council meeting today. It will be an introduction of sorts, to show that you are under the pack's protection." Her pulse fluttered. A council meeting? The mere idea intimidated her. She was still grappling with the concept that she was anything more than a lonely young woman struggling to make ends meet. Marcus offered a sympathetic look. "You can stand beside me, and no one will push you to speak. But seeing you will give our people hope. They need to witness that the rumors are true, that the Alpha's daughter has returned." Lena exhaled slowly. "I never left. I just never knew I was here in spirit. I feel like an imposter." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment, as though weighing whether to reassure her. "No one expects you to suddenly become an expert in pack matters. But your presence is symbolically important." She glanced at the untouched half of her toast. "Fine. But after that, I need a chance to see for myself what this place is. I want to understand who I am supposed to be." He inclined his head. "Of course, Ronan can show you around." Her eyes flicked up at the mention of Ronan. She had felt an inexplicable pull when she first encountered him, an undercurrent that stirred an unsteady warmth. She was not even sure if it was attraction, fear, or a combination of the two. "All right," she said, uncertain if her agreement was a good idea. Marcus rose to his feet. "Thank you for hearing me out. The meeting is in an hour, in the great hall on the first floor. Take your time, and when you are ready, come down. Someone will direct you." He stepped out, leaving her to her thoughts. She finished her meal in a pensive silence, forcing herself to eat even though her nerves threatened to rob her of appetite. After a quick shower, she rummaged through a small dresser to find clothes that Clara must have placed there. A plain sweater and a pair of jeans that fit her surprisingly well. She tied her hair into a loose braid, ignoring the trembling in her hands. When she made her way downstairs, 2 younger members of the pack quietly guided her to the great hall. The entrance was through a set of double doors, each carved with motifs of wolves and moonlight. As Lena pushed them open, she stepped into a high-ceilinged chamber with a long table at the center. Several men and women were already seated or standing, their chatter hushed but urgent. At the head of the table was Marcus, who looked up immediately upon her arrival. A hush fell over the room, as the others noticed her. She felt dozens of eyes upon her, some merely curious, others tinged with awe or skepticism. Self-consciousness gnawed at her, but she lifted her chin, reminding herself that she was not some helpless child. Gabriel stood near Marcus, his bandaged arm a stark reminder of the previous night's attack. Everett was at the far end, flipping through documents. Her gaze swept over the crowd until it landed on Ronan. He leaned against a stone pillar, arms crossed. He wore dark jeans and a fitted black shirt, his broad shoulders evident under the fabric. When their eyes met, a flicker of warmth passed between them, a subtle acknowledgement that they recognized each other from the night before. Marcus beckoned Lena forward, pulling out a chair next to him. She took a seat, her heartbeat still racing. "Thank you all for coming," he began, projecting his voice with an alpha's authority. "As many of you have heard, my daughter has returned to us, earlier than expected. The rogues that threatened our borders have become bolder, and so we must act swiftly to protect her and the pack." A murmur rippled through the group. Some bowed their heads in respect, others leaned forward, brimming with questions. Finally, an older man with silver hair, dressed in a tailored suit, cleared his throat. "Marcus, is it wise to reveal her presence now, given the danger? Perhaps she should be hidden until the threat is contained." Before Marcus could respond, Lena felt a surge of indignation. She was tired of being treated as an object to be stored away. "I understand you are trying to protect me," she interjected, voice steady, "but I will not go into hiding if that means these rogues keep terrorizing innocent people. My life is not more valuable than anyone else's here." A few startled looks darted her way, clearly not expecting her to speak. Marcus cast her a grateful nod, as if to say, "Well said." Another elder, a woman with kind eyes and braided hair, smiled faintly. "You sound like you carry your father's protective instincts," she observed. "But we must be careful. The prophecies are vague, and those who want to exploit them are cunning." Marcus cleared his throat. "We have already increased patrols of the northern and eastern borders. Ronan, you will coordinate with Gabriel and Everett to track any rogue sightings." Ronan pushed off the pillar, inclining his head in acknowledgement. "Consider it done." Lena felt a jolt of admiration at how he carried himself, self-assured yet not overbearing. There was something about him that drew her, like a gravitational pull she did not quite understand. She forced herself to focus on the conversation as the elders discussed security protocols, infiltration attempts, and the tense alliances with neighboring packs. Words like territory, treaties, and alliances blurred together. She realized that her father's responsibilities were akin to those of a king, and this pack functioned like a court, with political maneuvering and rivalries. Eventually, the elders shifted their discussion to the best strategies for protecting Lena. Some argued for secrecy, others for using her presence as a rallying point. Marcus listened to all perspectives, then stood, signaling an end to the meeting. "We will finalize our approach soon," he said, glancing at Lena. "I appreciate your patience. For now, let us remain alert." With that, the group began to disperse, some lingering to speak with each other in hushed tones. Lena pushed back her chair, exhaling in relief. She had not realized how tightly wound she was until that moment. As she turned to leave, Ronan appeared at her side, moving with a quiet confidence that set him apart from the others. "Marcus asked me to give you a tour," he said, his voice low so only she could hear. "Do you have a moment?" She nodded, curious about him as much as the place he was about to show her. "Sure. Might as well get familiar with my new surroundings." He gave a measured smile. "It will help you feel less like a stranger." They walked out of the great hall into a wide corridor lit by wall sconces. The stone floors were polished, and large windows offered glimpses of the surrounding forest. Despite the fortress-like appearance of the lodge, it felt oddly welcoming, perhaps because of the warm amber lighting and the soft murmur of voices echoing through the halls. "This entire estate is essentially pack territory," Ronan explained, gesturing to a series of doors that branched off the corridor. "We have living quarters, communal areas, training rooms, and a medical wing. Everything we need is here so that we can remain somewhat self-sufficient if our borders are threatened." Lena paused as they passed a large portrait of a man standing in a clearing, flanked by wolves. The plaque underneath read, "Lena Rivers, Founding Alpha." She tilted her head, noticing a slight family resemblance. "One of my ancestors?" she asked quietly. Ronan nodded. "Your great-grandfather. He established these lands as werewolf territory decades ago, forging alliances that allowed the pack to thrive." She studied the stern face in the portrait, feeling an odd twinge of pride mixed with dislocation. Her entire life had been a struggle, never knowing she had a heritage with such deep roots. "I had no idea," she whispered, realizing how small her perspective on the world had been until now. They continued down another hallway that opened into a training arena, where the floor was padded. A few pack members were sparring under the guidance of an older man who barked instructions. Lena watched as they demonstrated fluid, powerful movements that seemed to blend martial arts with something distinctly lupine in nature. "You will be encouraged to train at some point," Ronan said quietly. "Even though you are half human, your body may develop certain abilities now that you are among us. It can be overwhelming. Training will help you gain control." She arched an eyebrow. "You mean I might randomly turn into a wolf?" He chuckled softly. "Not randomly, but you might feel surges of strength, sharper senses, urges you did not have before. The full moon can trigger heightened transformations, especially if it is your first time shifting." Her heart skipped. "That is terrifying. I am not ready." Ronan's expression gentled. "No one can force the shift on you. But living here, in the pack's territory, your werewolf side is more likely to awaken. The best thing you can do is learn how to handle it." She chewed her lower lip, anxiety brimming. The day before, she was a human waitress, scraping by on tips and hardly dreaming beyond next month's rent. Now she stood in a werewolf fortress, hearing about transformations and powers lying dormant beneath her skin. She inhaled sharply, trying to ground herself. He must have sensed her turmoil because he guided her away from the training area, leaving her through a set of glass doors into a courtyard. The crisp morning air was refreshing, carrying the scent of dew and pine. A small fountain bubbled at the center, reflecting the sunlight in playful ripples. She strolled beside him, her arms wrapped around herself. "So, you have been with my father a long time." Ronan's gaze drifted over the landscaped shrubs. "Yes, since I was a teenager. He took me in when my own pack was destroyed by rogues. Over the years, I worked my way up to become his enforcer. It is my job to protect the alpha and enforce pack law." She considered the solemnity in his tone. "Does that mean you have to do the dirty work? Like punish those who break rules?" His jaw tensed slightly. "Sometimes, yes. It is not always pleasant, but it keeps the pack safe and ordered." She glanced at him, noticing the hint of sadness in his eyes, hidden beneath a layer of stoic professionalism. She wondered what burdens he carried in that role. "Thank you for what you do," she said softly, surprising herself with her sincerity. He looked at her, perhaps slightly taken aback by her gratitude. "I do what needs to be done." They reached a low stone wall on the edge of the courtyard, overlooking a gentle slope that led into the forest. The morning sun spread golden rays through the trees, and birds chirped among the branches. In that tranquil moment, the enormity of recent events pressed upon Lena's mind. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a second. "I do not know if I can handle all this," she admitted. "The pack, the prophecy, the danger. It feels like my life just flipped upside down overnight." Ronan stepped closer, resting his hands on the wall. His presence was calm, reassuring in a way she did not expect. "No one expects you to adjust instantly," he said, voice gentle. "But you do not have to go through this alone. You have the pack now, and you have me to watch your back." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. The sincerity in those dark irises warmed something inside her she had not realized was cold. "Thank you," she murmured. A rustling sound nearby snapped their attention to the tree line. Ronan instantly tensed, nostrils flaring as he caught a scent. Lena felt her heart skip at the memory of last night's attack. But instead of a rogue wolf charging out, Gabriel appeared, jogging up the slope toward them. His silver eyes were alight with urgency. "We found tracks near the western border," he announced, casting a quick glance at Lena. "Definitely rogues. They did not cross into our territory this time, but they were close." Ronan's expression hardened. "Were they alone?" Gabriel shook his head. No. We counted at least 3 different sets of tracks. Possibly more were waiting deeper in the woods. They are testing our defenses. A chill rippled through Lena. Ronan inclined his head toward her. I need to investigate, he said, his manner shifting to brisk efficiency. Stay inside the estate where it is secure. Do not go wandering alone, especially not beyond the gates. She understood the danger, but bristled at the thought of being confined. I will be careful, she promised, deciding not to argue. He and Gabriel disappeared quickly, leaving Lena alone by the courtyard wall. She watched them vanish around the corner of the lodge, her heart still pounding. She could see the seriousness etched on Ronan's face, the duty that demanded he put his life on the line for the pack. For her. Turning back to the view of the trees, she let the tension in her muscles slowly ease. Could she really become part of this world? She thought of the elders' meeting, of Marcus's weary eyes, of the hopeful glances cast her way. These people were placing their faith in her, expecting her to step into a role she knew nothing about. A sudden breeze swept through the courtyard, carrying the faint fragrance of pine resin. She closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath, and for a moment she felt something stir deep within her, a fleeting sensation of heightened awareness, as though the air around her shimmered with possibility. She heard the distant rustle of leaves, the scuttle of small creatures across the forest floor, and even the rhythmic beating of her own heart more distinctly. Startled, she opened her eyes. The sensation ebbed, leaving her both awed and unnerved. Pulling away from the wall, she decided it might be best to heed Ronan's advice and stay within the estate. She wandered back inside, passing a few curious pack members who greeted her politely. She tried to memorize faces, but her thoughts were crowded with questions. Eventually, she found herself in a quiet reading room, shelves brimming with texts on werewolf lore, pack histories, and family genealogies. Drawn by curiosity, she slid a hefty volume from one of the shelves. The cover bore a stylized wolf crest, and inside, pages were filled with detailed accounts of pack lines, territorial battles, and alliances. She flipped through until she found references to the Rivers lineage. Diagrams showed the branching lines of ancestry, with Marcus's name highlighted among them. Tears stung her eyes when she found a brief mention of her mother's name, giving her confirmation that, at least in some hidden record, she had always existed in this place. But there was little detail beyond that. Most of the text delved into old rivalries and treaties, mentioning repeated conflicts with rogues. One passage caught her eye, referencing a cryptic prophecy about a child of dual nature who would either unify or destroy. The passage was vague, peppered with archaic phrases that hinted at a cosmic balance. Lena slammed the book shut, unsettled. The door creaked open, and Everett stepped in, giving her a friendly nod. Hiding from the crowd, he teased gently. She set the book aside. Something like that. I just needed a moment of quiet. He walked over, glancing at the volume's title. Researching the family history, I see. That prophecy has been a shadow over this pack for decades. She frowned. So, everyone keeps saying, can you at least tell me more about it without all the cryptic nonsense? Everett sighed, hands in his pockets. It basically claims that an alpha's child, born from a human mother, will possess a singular power. The child could be a bridge between humans and werewolves, bringing unity and strength, or trigger a catastrophic war if that power is twisted by malice or fear. Her skin crawled at the implications. No pressure, right? He offered a half smile, tinged with sympathy. Marcus genuinely believed keeping you away was the best way to protect you and the pack. but it seems fate had other plans. She shook her head, frustration gnawing at her. How am I supposed to make sense of this? I barely know who I am, and I am surrounded by people who expect me to decide their future. Meanwhile, there are rogues in the woods, waiting for a chance to grab me. Everett placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. No one expects you to solve this overnight. We know this is not fair to you. Just be patient. Take it one step at a time. Learn to protect yourself. And talk to Marcus. He may have more information about your mother's wishes. Understanding that might give you clarity. She nodded, tears threatening again. I just feel so lost. He squeezed her shoulder gently. We have your back. You are not alone. She managed a small, grateful smile. Thank you, Everett. He directed her to a smaller lounge area, suggesting she get some fresh air or find something to occupy her thoughts until Ronan returned. Left on her own again, Lena wandered aimlessly, eventually finding her way to the kitchen, where a few pack members prepared lunch. One of them, an older woman with flour on her apron, handed Lena a muffin and told her to relax in the sunroom as she wished. Following that suggestion, Lena stepped into the sunroom, a cozy space with glass walls overlooking a flower garden. She sank into a wicker chair, nibbling on the muffin, trying to quell the uneasy swirl in her stomach. The day had stretched on, an odd mix of tension and anticipation. After some time, footsteps approached, and she looked up to see Ronan entering, his expression serious but softening when he spotted her. How are you holding up? He asked, stopping a few paces away. She shrugged, not sure how to put her feelings into words. I have been better, but also it is just so much to take in. Did you find any signs of more rogues? He shook his head. Nothing beyond what Gabriel already reported. We are tightening the patrols. So far, they are keeping to the shadows, testing our boundaries. Lena fiddled with the edge of her sweater sleeve. Is it always like this? Living on guard, expecting attacks? A shadow crossed his face. Not always. But tensions have been building for months. Some packs are pressuring Marcus for alliances on unfavorable terms, and others resent his power. Rogues exploit that discord. She took a breath. Sounds like a mess. It is, Ronan agreed, stepping closer. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. If there is anything I can do to help you adjust, let me know. I can show you more of our territory, help you train, or just talk if you need it. She studied him, appreciating how his gruff demeanor held a thread of genuine compassion. Maybe I could use some training, she said, recalling how helpless she felt during the rogue attack. I have never been particularly athletic, but if I am going to be a target, I would rather not cower in fear. A faint smile ghosted over his lips. We can start with basics, like self-defense techniques. You do not have to face the rogues alone, but it helps to know how to protect yourself if cornered. She nodded, standing. Thank you. Let's do it. He looked a bit surprised by her immediate enthusiasm, then motioned for her to follow him. They ventured into the hallway, eventually reaching the same training room she had seen before. The mat was empty now, and the overhead lights cast a bright glow across the expanse. Lena kicked off her shoes and stretched experimentally, feeling a flutter of nerves. Ronan removed his jacket, revealing muscled arms beneath his shirt. He walked to the center of the mat. Come stand across from me, he instructed, his tone calm and patient. First lesson is about stance. Balance is everything. She mirrored his posture as he demonstrated how to plant her feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, arms raised in a loose guard. The initial awkwardness faded as she focused on each movement, grateful for something tangible to learn. "Good," Ronan said, nodding. "Now, if someone lunges at you, pivot your body and use their momentum against them. Like this." He demonstrated a swift pivot and grab, showing her how to guide an assailant off balance. Lena tried to replicate the motion, stumbling at first. Ronan patiently corrected her stance, adjusting the angle of her shoulders with a light touch. She felt an unexpected spark at his proximity, a quickening of her breath. His focus was entirely on guiding her movements, though, and he seemed unaware of the effect his presence had on her. They repeated the move several times, and she gradually improved, though she doubted her ability to apply it in a real fight. Still, the knowledge empowered her. Next, Ronan showed her a few simple strikes, palm heels, elbows, and knees, emphasizing that brute strength mattered less than good technique and a willingness to act decisively. She tried to visualize the rogue wolves, channeling the fear they had inspired into determination. Each strike landed with a sharper snap than the last. "Remember, confidence can deter an attacker almost as much as physical skill," Ronan advised, stepping back to observe. "If you are cornered, do not show fear. Show them you are not easy prey." She inhaled, wiping sweat from her brow. "Easier said than done, but I will try." Ronan's lips curved into a mild grin. "I can tell you have grit." Warmth blossomed in her chest at the compliment. She was about to respond when the door to the training room opened, revealing Gabriel, who gave them a half-smile. "Marcus is asking for Lena," he said. "He wants to speak with her in his study." Lena stilled, a fresh wave of apprehension rolling through her. "Any idea why?" Gabriel shrugged. "He said it was urgent. Possibly about further developments with the rogues, or new details about your mother's past." He did not elaborate. She gathered her courage, glancing at Ronan. He nodded, as if to say, "Go ahead." "Thank you for the lesson," she said softly. "Any time," he replied. Following Gabriel out, Lena replayed the training in her mind. She felt a subtle, heady mix of adrenaline from the lesson and something else, an unspoken connection with Ronan that she could not fully explain. She pushed those thoughts aside, bracing herself for whatever news her father might have. In the hallway leading to Marcus's study, the tension felt palpable. She wondered if fresh reports of rogue activity had surfaced, or if something else had transpired. When she reached the door, she hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. Marcus stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, staring at a spread of documents on a desk. He glanced up, face grim. "Close the door," he said softly. She did as told, her pulse quickening at his troubled expression. "Is everything okay?" He let out a slow breath. "Not exactly. I have received word that a rogue faction has banded together under a single leader. They are growing bolder, and I fear they may launch a larger-scale assault soon. We also have indications that someone within the established packs might be feeding them information, possibly about you." Fear curled in her stomach, but she steadied her voice. "So someone is a traitor?" Marcus nodded, pointing to one of the documents. "We do not have enough to accuse anyone directly, but rumors place a certain pack leader at odds with me, and it would not be the first time alliances were made with rogues to shift power balances." Lena pressed her lips together, remembering the council meeting. "What can I do?" He looked at her, a strange mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. "For now, continue to learn about our ways. Strengthen yourself. We might have to reveal more of your potential sooner than planned in order to deter an all-out attack." The mention of her latent werewolf abilities sparked anxiety. I do not even know how to shift. Or if I can shift, I feel normal. Marcus moved closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched slightly at the unaccustomed paternal gesture, but did not pull away. Our lineage is strong. Sometimes, those with mixed heritage take more time to awaken, but it will come. We have ways to guide you, rituals that can facilitate a first shift. Her heart thumped. Rituals? He nodded. Not forced, mind you. They merely help you tap into the wolf inside you. But it can be dangerous if you are not ready, both physically and mentally. She swallowed hard. Maybe I am not ready. His gaze softened. We will not rush it, but I want you to be aware. Time is not on our side, and I fear each day we delay, our enemies gain ground. She sighed, the enormity of the situation weighing heavily. All right, she conceded, feeling like she was stepping onto a path with no clear destination. If it is for the pack's survival, I will consider it, but I need more information, more training, and more time to make sense of this. Marcus's tense features relaxed a fraction. Agreed. I will speak with the pack's spiritual guide. She can help you explore the transformation in a safe manner when you choose to proceed. Lena nodded, relief warring with lingering anxiety. She turned to go, then paused at the door. Dad, she said, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. When he looked at her with a flash of vulnerable hope, she continued, Whatever happens, I want to trust you. But this is new to me, so please, no more secrets. A haunted look passed across his face. No more secrets, he promised. She left the study, heart pounding, trying to steady herself. The corridor felt endless as she walked, each step echoing. Every time she thought she had found stable ground in this new reality, another tremor of uncertainty rattled her resolve. A swirl of images flooded her mind. Savage wolves in the moonlight, the hush of the pack's council, Ronan's steady gaze, and Marcus's anguished expression. Caught in the crossfire of prophecies and treachery, Lena could almost feel the weight of destiny pressing down on her chest. Yet a glimmer of resolve flickered within her, a spark of defiance against the fear. She was the Alpha's daughter, whether she liked it or not, and the fate of the pack now intertwined with her own. The next morning dawned with a pale sun that struggled to break through the mass of clouds overhead. Lena woke earlier than usual, pulled from restless dreams by a persistent sense of foreboding. She dressed in simple clothes that allowed her to move easily, sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, anticipating another self-defense lesson with Ronan. Every part of her body ached from the drills of the previous day, and yet there was a strange satisfaction in that muscle soreness. It reminded her that she was no longer just drifting through life, but actively preparing for whatever trials lay ahead. On her way downstairs, she passed by a trio of younger pack members chatting in the hall. They went quiet the moment they saw her, eyes tracking her with a blend of curiosity and reverence she still found unsettling. It drove home the point that her presence was no small matter in this household, and the weight of that realization pressed on her shoulders. She tried to offer them a friendly nod, and they bobbed their heads in return. One managed a hesitant smile, as though uncertain whether it was allowed. Lena tucked that moment away in her mind, aware that her every move might be dissected by the pack. She found her father, Marcus, in the lodge's spacious dining room. He was seated at a long wooden table, going through a stack of papers with Gabriel and Everett at his side. A sense of heaviness in the atmosphere suggested urgent matters were under discussion. As soon as Marcus noticed her, he motioned for her to join them. She hesitated briefly, torn between slipping away to avoid the tense conversation or stepping forward to learn more about her role. The memory of last night's talk, about a ritual, about her potential first shift, flashed through her mind. She drew a breath, squared her shoulders, and approached. Gabriel slid the documents aside, revealing a handwritten note with a crude wolf symbol drawn in one corner. It looked like some kind of threat or warning left at the border. Everett's expression was grim, though he offered Lena a polite smile. Marcus pushed a mug of coffee toward her, which she gratefully accepted, hands shaking slightly as she lifted it to her lips. "How bad is it?" she asked softly, eyeing the battered envelope in front of them. "Bad," Everett murmured, crossing his arms. This was pinned to a tree just outside our northern boundary. It's not just a random rogue scribble. There's a message scrawled inside, demanding that Marcus surrender certain territories or watch his pack bleed. They specifically mention the Alpha's hidden heir. Lena's stomach twisted. "They mean me," Marcus exhaled, nodding. "Yes. This is their way of letting us know they're not backing down. They've grown bolder, Lena, and it means we must escalate our defenses. I hate to involve you in a war before you've even discovered your full abilities, but..." She set the mug down a bit too hard, coffee sloshing. "I understand. This is bigger than just me. Tell me what needs to be done." He regarded her in silence, as though measuring how serious she was. Then he nodded gravely. "First, keep up your training. Ronan will continue working with you. Second, I want you to meet with Celia, the pack's spiritual guide, today. She can begin instructing you on the nature of your werewolf inheritance. You'll need to prepare for the possibility of shifting soon. If we're attacked en masse, you'll be safer if you can unlock your wolf side." A pang of trepidation ran through Lena, but she swallowed it down, giving a small nod. "All right." Marcus placed a gentle hand over hers. "I know it's overwhelming, but I'm grateful for your courage." She didn't trust her voice, so she just squeezed his hand in acknowledgement. Gabriel murmured something about coordinating with the patrols, then left the table with Everett to finalize new defensive arrangements. Marcus lingered a moment, looking at Lena with a mixture of fatherly concern and pride. "When you finish breakfast," he said softly, "Ronan will be waiting for you in the training hall." "Got it," she replied. "What about Celia?" "She'll find you once Ronan's done," Marcus answered. "She's usually at the Eastern Garden around midday. She may want to bring you to a quiet place in the woods for a reflection ceremony." Lena frowned. "Does that mean I'll have to leave the lodge's safe zone?" He hesitated. "Only briefly, and with an escort. We have to be careful, but Celia insists certain rites are best performed in natural surroundings." She grimaced but didn't argue. If she was going to face the possibility of shifting, maybe it was best to do it under the open sky. The sense of anxiety pulsing in her chest refused to abate, but she forced herself to focus on the practical steps in front of her. Eat something. Train with Ronan. Meet the mysterious spiritual guide. It sounded straightforward in theory, but each task carried the significance of upending everything she'd ever known about herself. After hastily finishing the rest of her coffee, food was too big an ask for her uneasy stomach. She headed to the training hall. This time, the large space was alive with activity. Several pack members sparred in pairs, while others worked through intense exercise drills. The tang of sweat and adrenaline hung in the air. She spotted Ronan near a punching bag, guiding a younger man through a sequence of jabs and hooks. As soon as he saw Lena, he wrapped up his instruction and approached. "Ready for round 2?" he asked, that subtle smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. Her nerves fluttered in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Yes," she managed, forcing her voice to sound steadier than she felt. I'm guessing we won't stay basic today. Ronan gave a short nod. We'll step it up. You learned some self-defense postures yesterday. Let's reinforce them, then add new elements. She steeled herself, stepping onto the mat. The other pack members watched with curiosity, but kept a respectful distance. Ronan circled her, assessing her stance with a discerning eye. Shoulders back, weight distributed evenly, he said. Show me that pivot and redirect move from yesterday. She complied, imagining an incoming attacker. Pivoting to one side, she hooked her arm in a controlled motion that would toss a lunging foe off balance. It wasn't perfect, but she completed the move with more fluidity than before. Ronan nodded. Not bad. Again. They repeated it, slow at first, then faster. After about a dozen tries, he introduced a counter-strike that involved driving her palm to an opponent's chest or throat once the pivot was complete. Lena's muscles protested each repetition, but she pushed on, determined not to let exhaustion beat her. Occasionally, she sensed the flicker of envy in the eyes of those watching. Some younger wolves who'd trained under Ronan for years. She tried not to overthink it. Ronan was devoting special attention to her because of her status, but she also couldn't deny that she enjoyed the sense of progress, the acknowledgement that she was more than just a pawn to be protected. Eventually, Ronan motioned for her to grab a quick drink of water. They stood by the edge of the mat, breathing heavily. She wiped sweat from her brow, appreciating the short break. Her gaze drifted to Ronan's face, noticing a faint scar near his jawline that she hadn't seen before. You've been in your share of fights, she ventured. He touched the scar absently, as though forgetting it was there. A few. The rogues have been a constant threat in recent years, and I've taken my lumps. That's part of being the enforcer. She lowered her voice. Marcus told me about your past, that your original pack was destroyed. I'm sorry. His expression went guarded. He nodded but didn't elaborate, as if the memory still stung too deeply. She respected his silence, sipping her water. Just then, Gabriel entered the training hall at a brisk stride, scanning the crowd until he located Ronan. The tension in his posture signaled more bad news. Lena's chest constricted at the possibility of yet another rogue sighting. We've got a development, Gabriel announced when he reached them, keeping his voice low. Marcus wants you both in the strategy room. Ronan's jaw set. Right now? Yes. The scouts returned from the southern border. They found evidence of an encampment, fresh tracks, half-burned remains of a fire. Could be a staging ground for a larger group. Lena swallowed, bracing herself for the next wave of anxiety. Ronan gave her a searching look, as if assessing whether to bring her along. Come on, he finally said. You should hear this. They followed Gabriel down a corridor toward the strategy room, which Lena recognized as the same space where she'd attended the council meeting. Marcus stood at a table spread with maps, flanked by Everett and a handful of elders. The conversation fell silent as soon as Lena, Ronan, and Gabriel entered. She glimpsed the tension etched into Marcus's features, the set of his shoulders rigid with stress. Everett tapped a finger on a section of the map. The scouts say they found multiple footprints leading in and out of this clearing. Wolf prints and human footprints, which suggests the group is partially shifted or has humans collaborating with them. They also found scraps of cloth that match the garments rogues wear when in half-shift forms. One elder, a wiry woman with steel-gray hair, added, If that many rogues are gathering, they're preparing for a direct assault. Likely they're waiting for nightfall or the next full moon to launch an attack under the best, quote, conditions. Marcus looked at Lena, as though weighing how much he should reveal in front of her. She squared her shoulders and met his gaze, a silent message that she needed the truth. He exhaled. They might be biding their time to see if I'll acquiesce to their demands. Since that's not going to happen, we must prepare for an imminent clash. The older man from the previous council meeting, wearing a tailored suit despite the tension, stepped forward. We could attempt a diplomatic parley, although the note they left was hardly diplomatic. Still, it might buy us time. Ronan shook his head. Rogues don't do diplomacy in any genuine sense. They'll use a parley to scout our defenses or stage another ambush. He looked at Marcus for agreement. Marcus sighed. I'm not opposed to a truce in principle, but these rogues have been killing innocents and harassing neighboring packs for months. We can't trust them. He turned to Lena. I'd hoped to give you more time to settle in, but the pack will need all its fighters soon. Even the ones who've never fully shifted. The weight of that statement slammed into Lena. Her stomach knotted. She felt unready, still uncertain of how to trigger a shift, let alone control it. But she sensed the entire pack's eyes on her, a swirl of hope and desperation in the air. She took a breath, trying to steady her resolve. I'll do whatever I can, she said softly. Marcus nodded. I'm arranging for you to meet Celia within the hour, as we discussed. Ronan, accompany her. While you're gone, we'll finalize defense strategies. Gabriel, Everett, and the others will stay behind to coordinate patrol. Rotations. Ronan inclined his head. We'll keep an eye out on the way. If rogues are massing near the southern border, they could have scouts roaming everywhere. Marcus placed a fatherly hand on Lena's shoulder. Remember, you can refuse any ritual. I won't force you. But if you feel ready, Celia can guide you through steps that might awaken your wolf side. It could be crucial in the coming fight. Her pulse thudded painfully. I'm scared, she admitted, voice trembling just enough for Ronan to glance over with quiet empathy. It's natural to be afraid, Marcus said gently. But you won't be alone. He left it at that. The room dissolved into hushed conversations about scouting parties and supply lists. Ronan guided Lena outside the lodge, where a jeep sat near the gates. As they climbed in, the sky overhead stayed brooding and gray, as if hinting at the turmoil brewing all around them. During the drive, Lena stared at the dense coniferous forest sliding by, each pine trunk a vertical slash of dark brown against moss and rock. She realized that, despite the fear gnawing at her, a part of her was curious about the ritual. In the last couple of days, she'd sensed flickers of heightened awareness, like hearing the forest more vividly, noticing scents she'd never perceived before. Was that a sign that her wolf side was stirring? Ronan kept both hands on the steering wheel, his attention shifting between the winding road and the forest. She could see the tension in his posture, the readiness in his reflexes. Ever feel like your life is one big fight? She asked softly. He grimaced. Sometimes. I try to remember there's more to it than fighting. But I won't lie, these days, conflict feels unavoidable. She let out a humorless chuckle. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. When the jeep stopped near an unmarked trailhead, Lena noticed a familiar figure waiting under the tall pines, a slender woman with thick, silver-streaked hair woven into long braids. Her posture was erect, eyes closed in a posture of meditative calm. She wore a flowing tunic and carried a small leather pouch around her waist. When she heard the jeep door slam, she opened her eyes, revealing a clear, deep gaze that immediately put Lena on edge and at ease all at once. A paradoxical sense that this woman could see straight into her soul but meant no harm. You must be Lena, Celia said in a gentle voice that carried surprising resonance. Lena nodded, stepping forward. That's me." Celia's lips curved in a faint, welcoming smile. "I've waited a long time to meet the child Marcus held so close in his heart." She turned to Ronan, giving him a respectful dip of the head. "You'll join us?" He cleared his throat. "If that's allowed." Marcus wanted me to stay close. Celia regarded him as though evaluating his energy. "Yes. I sense no conflict. You may observe." Lena glanced between them, unsure how these spiritual rites worked. Celia gestured for them to follow her along a narrow footpath that wound deeper into the forest. The canopy overhead grew denser, diffusing the pale sunlight into shifting patterns on the ground. Despite the tranquil setting, Lena's nerves refused to settle. She half expected a rogue wolf to leap from behind the thick ferns at any moment. Celia led them to a small clearing ringed by ancient oaks. At the center stood a flat boulder, its surface etched with faint runic symbols worn by time. A circle of stones surrounded the boulder, their positioning clearly deliberate. The air felt cooler here, charged with an uncanny hush. Lena shivered as a light breeze rustled through the leaves. "Stand inside the circle," Celia instructed, her tone comforting yet firm. Lena obeyed, stepping over one of the stones to position herself beside the boulder. Ronan lingered just outside the circle, arms folded but gaze alert. Celia opened the leather pouch at her waist, withdrawing a bundle of dried herbs and a small vial of thick, dark liquid. "Don't be alarmed," she said gently. "These are standard aids used in werewolf ceremonies. Plant essences to help you connect with your inner wolf." Lena swallowed hard. "Will it force me to shift?" "It can't force anything," Celia replied, "but it may lower the barriers in your mind that keep your wolf side dormant." "I'm still scared," Lena whispered. Celia offered a kind smile. "Fear is natural, but you must approach this with respect and an open heart. If at any point you wish to stop, say so, and we'll end the ceremony." Ronan's voice drifted in. "I'll be right here." That gave Lena a small measure of courage. She nodded to Celia, ready to proceed. Celia lit the bundle of dried herbs, producing fragrant smoke that wafted around them. She began chanting softly, words in an old dialect Lena didn't understand. The smoke spiraled upward in ghostly tendrils, and Lena breathed it in, detecting a sharp, earthy scent. Celia pressed the vial of dark liquid into Lena's hands. "Sip, but only a little. This is wolfsbane in a diluted form. Ironically, small amounts can heighten our awareness rather than harm us." Lena grimaced at the idea of consuming wolfsbane, a plant she associated with poison or old werewolf legends, but she trusted Celia's expertise. She took a cautious sip, expecting a bitter taste, which indeed coated her tongue like rancid tea. Her lips twisted in distaste, but she forced herself to swallow. "Close your eyes," Celia guided, her voice soft and melodic. "Focus on the energy in your body. Imagine roots extending from your feet into the earth, drawing upon the ancient power of this land." Lena obeyed, inhaling long, slow breaths. The taste of the liquid lingered on her tongue, and a warm, tingling sensation began to course through her limbs. She pictured her legs anchoring her to the earth, and her chest felt inexplicably lighter, as though a hidden door had cracked open inside her. Celia's chanting turned rhythmic, the drumbeat of her voice blending with the rustling leaves. Lena thought she could hear a second drumbeat, but then she realized it was her own heartbeat, thudding in her ears. Slowly, an awareness bloomed in her mind, a heightened sensitivity to the forest around her, the faint scuttle of tiny creatures in the undergrowth, the shift of wind currents overhead. Her pulse raced. Images flickered through her thoughts, hazy memories of her mother's face, then the savage shapes of rogue wolves baring their teeth. She grimaced as the swirl of impressions made her dizzy. A faint pang of fear coiled in her gut, but she tried to focus on Celia's voice and the gentle push to stay open. As though from a distance, she heard Ronan's voice asking, "Is this normal?" Celia murmured, "Yes, let her experience it." A sudden pulse of energy rippled up Lena's spine, strong enough that she gasped, her eyes flying open. She swayed, catching herself against the boulder. The forest looked different, sharper, more vivid. The edges of the leaves seemed outlined in silver, and her hearing felt hyper-tuned to every whisper of wind. She looked at her hands, half expecting them to sprout fur, but they remained human. "Focus on the wolf inside you," Celia encouraged, stepping closer. "Call it forth. Don't fight it, but don't let it overwhelm you either." A knot of panic tightened in Lena's throat. She closed her eyes again, trembling. In her mind's eye, she conjured a wolf, a shape that might be waiting within her. She tried to picture it stepping forward. At first, nothing happened. Then a faint growl echoed in her head, vibrating through her consciousness. A surge of heat rushed through her veins, and her muscles tensed. She felt her nails pressing against her palms, growing slightly sharper than before. For a fleeting second, she swore the shape of her hands changed, but the fear was too intense. She yanked back from it, as though recoiling from a fire. Her eyes snapped open, breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hands had returned to normal, nails their usual short length. I can't," she rasped, heart pounding. "It's too much." Celia rested a hand on Lena's shoulder, the chanting ebbing. "That's enough for now," she said gently. "You've taken a step, whether you feel it or not. Forcing the shift prematurely can be dangerous." Ronan started to step inside the circle, expression taut with concern. Lena reached out for support, and he slipped an arm around her, guiding her away from the boulder. Her knees wobbled, the residual energy crash leaving her drained. She leaned on him for a moment, fighting the wave of dizziness. "I felt something," she whispered, voice trembling, "like it was right there, but my fear pushed it away." Celia nodded in understanding. "That's often how it begins. Next time might be easier, or it might be harder. The wolf inside is powerful, but it responds to your emotional readiness." Ronan's arm remained secure around Lena's waist, a steady anchor. She clung to him, grappling with the tumult of shame for not being braver, relief for having stopped before losing control, and a strange mourning for the wolf that hovered just out of reach. How could something be so intrinsic to her bloodline, yet feel so alien? Celia's gaze turned serious as she packed away the herbs. "We'll need to continue soon, but for now, rest. The next attempt will be smoother if you process what happened here, rather than rushing back in." With that, the older woman gave a parting nod and walked off through the woods, her steps nearly soundless on the forest floor. Lena steadied her breathing, leaning less on Ronan as her dizziness subsided. I'm sorry," she muttered, not sure exactly what she was apologizing for. He exhaled slowly, looking at her with a mixture of empathy and admiration. "You did well," he said firmly. "No one expects you to master your shift overnight. You've just begun." She let her gaze wander over the clearing, noting how the air still crackled with a faint residue of the ritual. "Still, I want to be able to defend myself, defend the pack. Everyone's putting their hopes on me, but I'm clueless." Ronan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's why you have guides like Celia, your father, the rest of the pack, me." His voice lowered on the last word, a subtle warmth in his tone. Her cheeks grew hot. She glanced away, unsure how to respond to the undercurrent passing between them. Before she could gather her thoughts, a distant howl echoed through the forest, low and mournful. She froze, instincts on high alert. Ronan stiffened as well, shifting his stance protectively. "That sounded close," she whispered. "Too close," he agreed, scanning the tree line. "We should head back. Now." They hurried along the trail, Lena's pulse thudding in her ears. Ronan took point, senses on full alert, while Lena tried to harness that heightened awareness she'd felt moments ago. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves jolted her nerves. She gripped the pepper spray she still carried, feeling how pitiful a defense it seemed against an army of rogue werewolves. But it was better than nothing. Midway through the hike back, they heard another howl, this one closer, accompanied by rustling in the dense undergrowth. Ronan growled under his breath. "Run," he said, voice low and urgent. "I'll cover you." Her heart nearly stopped. She was no faster than an average human, maybe slower with her trembling legs. "I'm not leaving you here alone," she managed, adrenaline spiking. He turned to her, eyes flashing. "If they're rogues, you're the priority target. Go." She hesitated only an instant. Survival instincts and trust in Ronan's skill propelled her. She broke into a run, forcing her legs to move, even though fear curled in her gut. Behind her, she heard him growl, in a way that was distinctly inhuman, and an answering snarl rippled through the trees. Terror fueled her sprint. Branches whipped at her face, and her breath grew ragged. She dashed for the jeep, hoping Ronan would catch up. At any second, she expected a rogue wolf to burst from the brush. Her eyes darted left and right, scanning for any sign of movement, every nerve on edge. Then, with a crash of leaves, a massive wolf-like figure emerged from her left, blocking the path. She skidded to a halt, nearly tumbling forward. It was mottled brown with scars across its muzzle, eyes gleaming with malevolence. Her mind raced. She realized this might be the same creature that attacked her nights ago, or at least one from the same group. It growled, hackles raised. Clutching the pepper spray, she aimed it with shaky hands. "Stay back," she warned, voice trembling. The beast snarled, taking a threatening step. In a desperate move, Lena discharged the pepper spray. The wolf yelped, shaking its head as the chemical burned its sensitive nose. She dove sideways, scrambling toward the only gap in the undergrowth that didn't lead straight into the wolf's snapping jaws. A second figure hurtled into the clearing, Ronan, eyes blazing, partially shifted. He wasn't fully in wolf form, but elongated claws and a feral cast to his features marked the partial transformation. With a snarl, he launched himself at the rogue. They collided in a flurry of fur and muscle, jaws snapping and claws raking. The savage sounds of their fight nearly paralyzed Lena with horror. She forced herself to move, searching for a stick, a rock, anything to use as a weapon. The rogue battered Ronan against a tree, but Ronan recovered quickly, landing a brutal strike that made the robe howl. Blood sprayed across the fallen leaves. "Go," Ronan shouted in a voice that was half human, half beast. Heart pounding, Lena darted around them, but she refused to completely abandon Ronan. She crouched behind a thick trunk, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the pepper spray. She could see them locked in close combat, each trying to pin or claw the other. Ronan landed another vicious blow that sent the rogue sprawling. In that instant, the rogue twisted, its jaws snapping at Ronan's exposed side. A pained cry tore from Ronan's throat, and he staggered. Lena's blood went cold. Without thinking, she rushed forward, ignoring every survival instinct screaming at her to run. She circled behind the rogue, aimed the pepper spray at its eyes, and unleashed another stream. It thrashed half-blind, and Ronan took the opening to land a final strike that tore the creature's throat. The rogue wolf collapsed with a gurgling snarl, convulsed, and then went limp. Shaking with adrenaline, Lena stumbled back from the body, heart hammering. Ronan, still partially shifted, panted heavily, blood trickling from a deep gash in his side. Gradually, his features returned to normal, claws retracting, wolfish snout smoothing into human form. He staggered, and she rushed to support him. "You're hurt," she gasped, pressing her hand to the wound. Warm blood oozed between her fingers. "I'll heal," he managed, though his face was pale. "We need to get out of here, in case others are near." She nodded, swallowing her panic. Leaning against each other for support, they pushed through the brush until they reached the jeep. Ronan slumped into the passenger seat, breathing in shallow, pained gasps. Lena fumbled the keys from his pocket, her hands shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to start the engine. "Stay with me," she urged, voice high with anxiety. "We'll get you to the pack's medic." Ronan tried to speak, but his words came out a feeble mumble. She pressed the accelerator, navigating the bumpy road with as much speed as she dared. Every jolt made him groan in pain. Her eyes blurred with tears, guilt gnawing at her for leaving him to fight alone. Yet she also knew they'd had no choice. At last, they reached the lodge. Pack members rushed out at the sight of the blood-streaked jeep. Lena flung the door open, shouting for help. Multiple hands reached in to lift Ronan carefully, carrying him toward the medical wing. Lena stumbled after them, her own adrenaline crush leaving her woozy. She noticed that her clothes were stained with his blood, a stark reminder of how close she'd come to losing him. In the sterile environment of the medical wing, a female doctor with a confident air, likely the pack's head physician, began treating Ronan's wounds. She and her assistants cleaned and dressed the gash. Lena hovered anxiously in the doorway, uncertain whether to remain or leave them to work. The doctor sent her a quick glance. "He'll be all right," she said. "He's a strong one, but we'll keep him here overnight to make sure the healing process goes smoothly." Relief washed over Lena, making her sag against the doorframe. With the crisis momentarily in hand, she realized her entire body shook from the after effects of terror. Marcus appeared at her side, quietly guiding her away so the medical team could focus. He led her to a nearby bench in the corridor, where she collapsed, burying her face in her hands. She felt the warmth of his hand on her back, trying to offer comfort. "What happened?" Marcus asked gently, though his voice was taut with concern. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. "A rogue ambushed us. Ronan fought it off, but he got hurt. I'm so sorry. We should never have left the lodge. We should have come sooner to get back up." Marcus exhaled, anguish and anger mingling in his expression. "This is my fault," he murmured. "I sent you out there to meet Celia. I knew the risk." He pulled her into a brief but fierce embrace, the fatherly protective instinct blazing in his eyes. "I'm just grateful you both made it back alive." She let him hold her, the realization settling that she did feel a father's warmth in his arms, something she'd never experienced before. The raw swirl of emotions stung her eyes with fresh tears, but she swallowed them down, wanting to stay strong. Eventually, she straightened, steadying herself. "One of them is dead, the rogue, but there might be more nearby. We'll send more scouts," Marcus said, voice sharpened by determination. "And double the trolls. This has gone too far." "Why, I'll help however I can," Lena whispered, thinking of how she still needed training, needed to figure out how to face the threat without cowering. The memory of that terrifying moment when she tried to call forth her wolf flickered in her mind. She wasn't there yet, but she couldn't ignore the fact that the pack needed her to embrace her heritage if they were going to survive the oncoming storm. Marcus nodded, gentling his tone. "You've done enough for today. Get some rest. We'll organize a formal council meeting tonight. Things are escalating fast." She agreed, though she knew sleep would be elusive. Before she went upstairs to her room, she slipped back into the medical wing, peeking in on Ronan. He lay on a cot, eyes closed, bandages wrapped around his torso. The doctor spotted Lena and nodded. "He's resting now. The healing factor should kick in, but the wound was deep. He'll be back on his feet soon enough." Lena quietly stepped to his bedside, heart clenching at the sight of him so pale. She touched his hand lightly, her thoughts a tumult of gratitude and unresolved feelings. He'd risked his life for her. She wanted to say so many things, but he remained unconscious, his face lined with pain even in rest. After a moment, she gently placed his hand back down and exited, a silent promise on her lips that she would become strong enough to stand beside him, not cower behind him. Upstairs in her room, she removed her blood-stained clothes and took a hot shower, trying to scrub away the scents and images of the day. Memories swirled in her mind. The ritual, the moment she almost shifted, and the savage battle that had nearly cost Ronan his life. By the time she stepped out, her head pounded with exhaustion. Wrapping herself in a towel, she sank onto the bed, physically and emotionally spent. That night, the lodge's corridors bustled with preparations. She could hear the distant echo of voices, the shuffle of boots, the sound of crates being moved. Everyone was gearing up for a confrontation that felt imminent. Lena managed to doze off for a while, her dreams fraught with vivid images of wolves under a blood-red moon. When she finally woke, darkness had settled outside, and a knock on her door roused her. She opened it to find Everett waiting, his expression grave. "Marcus is gathering the council in the great hall. He'd like you to join." Though her limbs felt like lead, she nodded, dressing quickly in fresh jeans and a sweater. She followed Everett down the hall, bracing herself for more dire news. The great hall was crowded, every seat at the long table taken, with additional pack members standing against the walls. The tension was palpable. Marcus stood at the head, conferring with Gabriel. A hush fell when Lena entered, all eyes swiveling to her. "Welcome, Lena," Marcus said, motioning her to a seat on his right. She took it, her nerves jangling under so many watchful gazes. Marcus cleared his throat. "We've confirmed that the rogue faction is mobilizing near our southern border. We have about 2 days until the moon is at its fullest, which likely means they'll strike soon. The fact that they dared to attack in broad daylight, targeting Lena, speaks to their desperation or their confidence," Gabriel added. "Our scouts estimate at least 10 to 15 rogues in the immediate area, but numbers could be higher. We also suspect they may have an inside contact feeding them information." An uneasy murmur spread through the hall. Lena noticed that some faces displayed shock, others displayed something like resigned acceptance, as if they'd suspected treachery all along. One of the elders voiced what everyone was thinking. "We have traitors among us?" "It's possible," Everett confirmed. "No one knows for sure yet who it might be, but we've seen inconsistencies in patrol reports, like someone arranged to leave certain areas understaffed at crucial times." Marcus's gaze swept over the group. "We will investigate discreetly. If there is a mole, we'll flush them out, but we cannot let suspicion tear us apart. Unity is our greatest strength." Another elder, the steel-haired woman Lena recalled from the first council meeting, spoke up. In light of this threat, do we have the resources to fortify our lodge if the rogues launch a direct siege? We do, Marcus said, jaw tightening. But they have a significant advantage in numbers. They could try to draw our fighters out into smaller skirmishes. We must be cautious. Several pack members argued about whether to send a vanguard to strike the rogues first or remain defensively positioned at the lodge. Marcus listened, a crease forming between his brows. Finally, he raised a hand to quiet them. Let's settle this. We will fortify the lodge and maintain strong border patrols. If they want to fight on the open field, we'll choose the time and place, not them. An older man in a black coat nodded. Agreed. What about the heir? His gaze flicked to Lena. Should we hide her again? Maybe move her to a remote cabin outside these lands? Lena swallowed. The idea of fleeing felt like admitting defeat. She shook her head. I'm not running. That won't end anything. They'll keep hunting me. I'd rather stand and face this, even if I'm not fully ready. A mixture of surprise and approval flickered across several faces. Marcus's lips curved in a small, proud smile. My daughter speaks for herself. She will remain here, protected by our strongest fighters. The meeting continued for another hour, hashing out patrol assignments and contingency plans for evacuating non-combatants, children, the elderly, and anyone else vulnerable. As the strategies took shape, Lena felt a knot of dread tighten in her gut. A battle was inevitable, and she had to prepare to face it. Finally, the council adjourned. People filed out, some offering Lena encouraging words. She mustered grateful nods, though her anxiety gnawed from within. Once the crowd dispersed, Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll get through this, he said softly. I promise. She gave a brittle smile. I hope so. Take the night to rest. Check on Ronan if you want. In the morning, if you feel up to it, Celia can guide you again. But I won't push you, he added gently. Lena nodded, an unspoken agreement passing between them. She slipped away, heading back toward the medical wing. The overhead lights cast a sterile glow on the corridor's polished floors. She peeked into Ronan's room, finding him awake, propped up on pillows, color returning to his cheeks. Relief loosened the tension in her chest. Hey, she murmured, stepping inside. He turned his head, a soft smile curving his lips. Hey yourself. She approached, noticing fresh bandages around his torso. He still looked exhausted, but the worst of his pallor had faded. How are you feeling? He grimaced slightly. Like I got hit by a truck, but it'll pass. Werewolf healing is a blessing. She lowered herself onto the chair beside his bed. For a moment she said nothing, just taking in the relief of seeing him conscious. Eventually, she whispered, Thank you. For saving my life, he shifted, wincing. You saved mine too. That rogue was about to take a chunk out of me if you hadn't jumped in. She shook her head, blinking back tears. You got hurt because you were protecting me. Worth it, he replied, voice quiet but resolute. Emotions clogged her throat. She tentatively reached for his hand, finding it warm beneath her touch. He squeezed her fingers lightly, a silent acknowledgement of everything swirling between them. Gratitude, fear, maybe something deeper they both hesitated to name. The moment stretched, filled with the quiet hum of medical monitors. Finally, she spoke again. There's a council plan. A big fight is coming, maybe in a day or two. Marcus wants me to keep training, possibly try the ritual again. But I'm terrified. He ran his thumb over her knuckles, an intimate gesture that made her heart flutter. "I won't lie. It'll be dangerous. But we'll stand together, Lena. You're not alone." She swallowed, recalling the savage violence she'd witnessed in the forest. At the same time, she remembered the flicker of her own wolf side during Celia's ceremony. Though it scared her, a spark of determination took root. "Then I'll do it," she whispered, meeting his gaze. "I'll find a way to shift, or at least unlock enough of my power to fight." A faint smile touched his lips. "I've seen your courage. If anyone can do it, you can." They fell into a companionable silence. Eventually, the doctor appeared to check Ronan's vitals, giving Lena a pointed look that said he needed rest. She reluctantly stood. "I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" He gave her hand another gentle squeeze before letting go. "See you then." In the corridor, Lena leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. So much had changed in such a short time. She remembered how, just a week ago, her biggest worries were her shift schedule at a small grill and making rent. Now she was preparing to fight a rogue werewolf faction, possibly tapping into an ancient prophecy about uniting or destroying a powerful pack. Despite the fear, a thread of purpose wove through her. She thought of the pack's hopeful faces, her father's unwavering resolve, Ronan's devotion, and the fateful possibility that her presence might tip the balance in a looming war. She inhaled, drawing on that purpose to steady herself. Then, with determined steps, she headed to her room. She would rest, gather her strength, and wake ready to face the unknown. The battle ahead seemed unavoidable, but she was done running. If destiny had chosen her to be the Alpha's daughter, then she would find the power within that name, even if it meant stepping into the very darkness she feared. Morning light struggled to break through the thick storm clouds crowding the sky. A palpable tension weighed on the lodge, every corridor thrummed with hushed urgency. The trolls rotated in and out of the building, bringing updates that the rogues were edging ever closer. The pack's numbers, while respectable, were dwarfed by the rumors of how many lawless wolves massed at the border. Lena woke feeling a mix of dread and determination. She dressed quickly, pulling on sturdy boots, a fleece-lined jacket, and tying her hair in a low braid. Outside her window, she could see the forest stretching like a vast living labyrinth, harboring both allies and enemies. The memory of the near-fatal ambush gnawed at her, but the knowledge that the final confrontation loomed gave her no room to linger in fear. In the hall, she found the same 3 younger pack members who'd once eyed her with reverence. Now they looked at her like they hoped she would be the miracle that saved them all. She exchanged polite greetings, her throat tightening. The weight of their expectations pressed on her. She made her way toward the central gathering area, where some pack members were rechecking weapons, silver-tipped arrows, reinforced batons. A few nodded at her. Lena found it strange to see such a blend of modern tools and old supernatural might, but she supposed werewolves adapted just like anyone else. Marcus emerged from around a corner, looking more tired than she'd ever seen him, dark circles under his eyes. "I was hoping to find you," he said, forcing a small smile. "Ronan is up and about, albeit carefully. He wants to join the morning patrol, but the doctor isn't thrilled about him straining his injuries." Relief and worry mingled in her chest. "He's well enough to walk?" "Yes, but he's stubborn." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe you can convince him not to overdo it." She hesitated, uncertain if Ronan would listen to her. But the idea of seeing him again lifted her spirits. "I'll try." Marcus pointed her toward the rear courtyard, where a secondary group of fighters was preparing to head out. Lena crossed the lodge, stepping outside into a cold blast of air that carried the scent of damp earth. She spotted Ronan standing with Gabriel, who was gesturing emphatically while Ronan wore a stoic expression. His torso was wrapped with fresh bandages under a dark shirt, but he still managed to look imposing. Gabriel threw his hands up in exasperation. "You were nearly eviscerated yesterday. Stop trying to prove you're indestructible," Ronan grunted. "I'm fine. We're short on experienced trackers, and we need to confirm the rogue positions. The only way is to go out there." "Which is exactly why I'm going," Gabriel insisted. "And you're staying here until you heal." Lena approached, clearing her throat. Both men turned. Ronan offered a half-smile that stirred a warmth in her chest. Gabriel folded his arms, glancing pointedly between them. "Maybe you'll have better luck telling this fool to rest," he muttered, then stalked off to join the waiting patrol. Lena lifted an eyebrow at Ronan. "He's right, you know. You need time to recover." Ronan shifted his weight, a faint wince betraying his pain. "We don't have time," he said, voice firm. "Every able-bodied fighter is needed. I can still track, even if I'm not at full strength." She took a step closer, lowering her voice so the other pack members wouldn't overhear. "I appreciate your dedication, but you won't do anyone any good if you collapse in the field." He sighed, tension creasing his brow. "I can't just sit here while everyone else risks their lives." His gaze flicked to the forest beyond the courtyard, expression tormented. "I've sworn to protect your father, protect you. Letting others do the scouting while I lie in bed goes against everything I stand for." She set a hand gently on his arm, mindful of his injury. "I understand, really. But it's okay to let others handle it this time. Focus on healing so you're ready for the big fight that's coming." She paused, meeting his eyes. "Please." Their gazes locked, and for a heartbeat, the world felt very still. She could see the conflict warring inside him, the primal drive to defend, and the rational understanding that he was wounded. Finally, he exhaled, letting the fight drain from his posture. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll stay back, but I hate feeling useless." She managed a small smile. "You're far from useless. In fact, I was hoping you'd help me train some more. I'm sure Celia wants to attempt the ritual again, but I need more grounding in my physical skills first." That seemed to brighten his mood slightly. "That I can do. Let's go to the training hall, and I'll show you some advanced techniques that don't require me to strain my side too much." They walked together through the corridors, garnering a few curious stares from pack members who recognized the subtle closeness between them. Lena tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the swirl of emotions she felt whenever she was near him, a blend of safety, admiration, and a flutter she might dare call attraction. They reached the training hall, which was quieter than usual, most fighters having gone to their assignments. Only a handful of people occupied the space, sparring or exercising in small groups. Ronan led Lena to a cleared mat near the back. He stretched carefully, grimacing a bit, then turned to face her. "Let's pick up where we left off," he said. "You did well against that rogue when you used your pivot and pepper spray. But let's refine your follow-through so you rely less on the spray if you can't use it." She nodded, adjusting her stance. He guided her through the motions, demonstrating an evasive pivot into a strike that targeted an attacker's vulnerable spots, throat, solar plexus. Although he moved more gingerly than before, he remained an excellent instructor, correcting her footwork and posture with precision. After they repeated the sequence multiple times, Lena paused to catch her breath. "I just realized I've been too dependent on that spray. If I lose it, I'm pretty much back to square one." He shrugged gently. "In a real fight, You use whatever advantage you have. But yes, you should be prepared to fight barehanded. Fortunately, you're quick and you have decent reflexes. A full-grown werewolf has more raw strength, but speed and technique can tip the scales, especially if you learn to harness your wolf side. She tensed at the reminder of her partial shift attempt. I couldn't do it before, she admitted, but I can't give up. We might not have more time to figure this out. Ronan's eyes softened. You will figure it out. Just don't force it. Embracing the wolf comes easier when you trust yourself. And it. She absorbed that advice with a cautious nod. After a final round of drills, he lowered his arms, pressing a hand to the bandage on his side, wincing. That's enough, he said, breath tight. I can't risk pulling a stitch. Let's give you a break too. She swallowed her disappointment at seeing him in pain. Okay. Thank you. Do you need me to get the doctor? He shook his head. I'll be all right. Go see if Celia's free. She might want to talk about next steps for the ritual. Just promise me you won't push yourself too far. She studied his face, the new lines of pain that hadn't been there days ago. The desire to protect him, to protect everyone, flooded her. I promise, she murmured. Giving him a final concerned glance, she exited the training hall. It didn't take long to find Celia. The silver-braided spiritual guide was in one of the lodge's libraries, poring over a stack of old tomes and scribbled notes. She looked up at Lena's approach, the lines around her eyes deepening in a warm smile. I sensed you might come. Lena raised an eyebrow. You sensed it? Celia gave a light chuckle. We are werewolves, child. We often catch the drift of each other's emotions or intent, especially those with strong spiritual roles. Now, sit with me. Lena complied, settling into a chair at a small table. I need to try again, don't I? She said, voice subdued. My father thinks we'll face the rogues any day now. If I can't shift. Celia raised a hand, gently stopping her. Don't let fear become your only motivation. A forced shift can lead to a painful, uncontrolled transformation, and once your wolf is unleashed that way, it could be as dangerous to you as to any enemy. We need a different approach. Lena's stomach fluttered. So, what do you suggest? Celia spread open one of the tomes, revealing illustrated runes and archaic text. There's a safer method, an invocation we rarely use because it opens the path to the wolf gradually. It involves a guided trance, focusing on bridging the gap between your human mind and your wolf spirit. Lena glanced at the intricate runes. Will we do it here? No, Celia said. We'll go to the same clearing, but we'll ward it more thoroughly. And we'll bring a small group who can help keep watch for rogues. A spike of fear shot through Lena at the idea of traveling into the forest again, especially after the ambush. But she knew the lodge was hardly safe, if traitors lurked. All right, she said, heart hammering. When? Celia considered the window, gauging the natural light. Twilight is the best time, when day and night overlap. There's a thin veil, so to speak, between our physical world and our spiritual essence. Tonight? Lena's voice wavered. Are we sure we have time? Celia offered a gentle shrug. If we don't do it tonight, we'll have to wait for dawn tomorrow. But the rogues may attack any time between now and the full moon. The choice is yours, that I recommend we act sooner rather than later. Lena stared at the runic text, remembering the near shift she'd felt the previous day. Something inside her pulsed with cautious eagerness, as though the wolf within wanted another chance. Taking a steadying breath, she met Celia's gaze. "All right. Tonight. Good," Celia said, lips curving into a calm smile. "Spend the next few hours gathering your thoughts and your courage. We'll leave just after sundown." With that, Lena rose, nerves buzzing. She thanked Celia and left the library. There was a sense of finality in the air, as though she was about to cross a threshold that could change her forever. She caught glimpses of pack members hurrying about, some heading out on patrol, others reinforcing doors and windows, preparing for a possible siege. The tension was a living thing, coiling through every hallway. She headed to the medical wing to check on Ronan again, but found his bed empty. Panicking, she asked one of the nurses. They informed her he'd gone to speak with Marcus about security details, ignoring their orders to rest. Lena sighed, half amused, half annoyed by his stubbornness. At least he felt well enough to walk around. Trying to calm her own nerves, she retrieved a sandwich from the kitchen, though her appetite was minimal. She forced herself to eat, aware she'd need energy for whatever the night demanded. Then she retreated to her room, wanting a little solitude. Outside her window, a dark bank of clouds gathered, blotting out the sun, hinting at rain or a storm. It fit the turbulent mood inside her mind. Time blurred as she paced the room, occasionally sitting on the edge of the bed to steady her racing thoughts. Part of her wanted to find Marcus or Ronan for reassurance, but she also sensed this next step had to come from her own resolve. The prophecy that loomed over her life suddenly felt more real than ever, a prophecy that claimed she could either unite the pack or destroy it. Which outcome would her actions bring? Eventually, twilight arrived, painting the sky with muted purples and grays. Lena ventured downstairs, where Celia waited with a small contingent of pack members, Gabriel, Everett, and 2 others. To her surprise, Ronan was also there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. The bandage around his torso was evident under his jacket, but he had that familiar determined glint in his eye. "You're coming?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "I promise to protect you. Besides, I'd like to see you succeed in this." She managed a small smile, gratitude welling up. Celia cleared her throat. "Let's be on our way before night fully sets in." They piled into 2 SUVs, each with a driver and a passenger scanning the surroundings. Lena rode in the back with Celia, while Ronan took the front passenger seat, occasionally twisting around to check on them. The drive was tense and quiet, save for the hum of the engine. When they arrived at the forest clearing, twilight had almost surrendered to darkness. The wind picked up, rustling branches in a low murmur. Clouds drifted past a waning moon, flickering shadows across the ground. Lena stepped out, heart hammering. This was the place where she'd tried and failed before. She braced herself for a repeat of the fear that had overwhelmed her. Celia moved swiftly to set up protective wards around the clearing, sprinkling a mixture of powdered salt and herbs in a wide circle, chanting under her breath. The pack members kept a tight perimeter, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of rogues. Ronan stood not far from Lena, hands at his sides, readiness in every line of his body. The older woman beckoned Lena to the center of the circle, near the boulder with runic markings. She produced a small wooden bowl, filling it with water and stirring in a few drops of oil. Then she drew out a thin dagger with a carved handle. Lena tensed. "What's that for?" Celia glanced at her. "A minor blood offering, nothing extreme. Blood carries the essence of our dual nature, human and wolf. We'll use just a few drops to anchor the invocation." Swallowing hard, Lena nodded. She extended her palm, and Celia made a small cut, careful but sure. Crimson droplets welled up. Lena bit her lip, forcing herself not to flinch. Celia held the bowl under her hand, letting a few drops of blood mingle with the water. The spiritual guide's chanting intensified. She traced a symbol on Lena's forehead with the mixture, the liquid cool and oddly tingly on Lena's skin. Ronan shifted closer, but stayed outside the circle. Through the corner of her eye, Lena could see Gabriel and Everett scanning the darkness, crossbows in hand. Celia locked eyes with Lena. "Close your eyes, feel your heartbeat, acknowledge the wolf within, but don't try to command it, invite it." Adrenaline surged in Lena's veins. She shut her eyes, inhaling the scent of pine and damp earth. Her heartbeat sounded like distant thunder in her ears. "Slow your breathing," she told herself. She pictured the hazy silhouette of a wolf in her mind's eye, this time not as a fearsome stranger, but as a reflection of something inside her. The chanting rose in pitch, Celia's voice weaving an ancient melody that vibrated through Lena's bones. She felt a cool breeze swirl around her, as though the forest itself were responding. Gradually, a warmth built in her chest, radiating outward. She sensed that ephemeral presence again, the wolf, nudging the boundaries of her human consciousness. A low growl echoed in her thoughts. Lena tensed, but she refused to recoil this time. Instead, she whispered inwardly, "It's okay. I'm ready to see you." Another pulse of warmth shot through her limbs. She curled her toes, feeling an odd pressure along her spine. Pain flared briefly, and she let out a stifled gasp. Her nails began to tingle, as though they might lengthen. Panic flickered, but she clung to a thread of calm, remembering Celia's instructions not to force the shift nor fight it. Pain ramped up, rippling across her muscles. She inhaled sharply, hands trembling. In her mind's eye, the wolf shape emerged from shadow, stepping forward with cautious grace. Its fur was a dark brown with streaks of lighter tones, and its eyes gleamed with a hint of gold. The creature approached her mental image, sniffing the air as though acknowledging her presence. Then, as she opened her eyes, reality bent. The clearing blurred at the edges, her senses amplifying in a disorienting rush. She could hear the heartbeat of every person nearby, smell the damp bark on each tree. The swirl of adrenaline made her pulse surge. She flexed her hands, half expecting them to be padded paws. The partial shift overcame her. Her vision sharpened. She felt the bones in her face ache to rearrange, but it wasn't as agonizing as she'd feared. She embraced the transformation, instead of recoiling, letting out a throaty sound that was part groan, part growl. Fur prickled along her arms, though she couldn't tell if it was visible or just beneath the skin. The swirl of sensations was overwhelming and exhilarating. Celia's voice cut through the fog. "Steady, breathe through it." Lena complied, each breath forging a fragile connection between her human consciousness and the animal power welling within. She glanced down at her hands and saw they'd partially shifted, fingers elongated, nails thick and curved. She gasped, caught between awe and terror. From the edge of the circle, Ronan's voice carried softly. "That's it, Lena. You've got this." Hearing his encouragement grounded her. She let out a trembling exhale, focusing on the synergy of wolf and human. The pain in her bones receded, replaced by a fierce vitality. She felt strong, agile, her senses ablaze with the night around her. Yet, she also retained clarity. She wasn't lost to an animal frenzy. She took a shaky step, half expecting to stumble. Instead, her reflexes were sharper than usual, balance steady. A wave of joy and relief washed over her. She'd managed a partial shift without spiraling into chaos. The swirl of chanting faded as Celia's voice slowed, satisfaction evident in her tone. "You've done it," Celia whispered. "You've bridged the gap." Before Lena could respond, a sudden shout came from the perimeter. Gabriel's voice. "Rogues! Incoming on the east side!" Every sense in Lena went haywire. She caught a scent on the wind, sour, feral. Her newly enhanced instincts recognized danger. She whirled, seeing shadows moving between the trees, eyes shining malevolently. A half-dozen shapes broke from the undergrowth, charging at the circle. A cacophony of snarls erupted. "Defensive positions!" Everett yelled, firing a crossbow bolt that sank into one rogue's shoulder. It howled but kept coming. Celia shouted for Lena to remain in the circle, but panic ignited. The wards might not hold against a full attack. Meanwhile, Ronan and Gabriel rushed forward, meeting the oncoming rogues with brutal force. Ronan's partial shift reemerged, claws ripping through a rogue's flank. Gabriel swiftly notched another bolt, embedding it in a rogue's chest. The fight intensified, bodies colliding in savage combat. Everett grappled with one wolf near the boulder, teeth bared in a deadly snarl. Celia retreated to a safer distance, continuing to chant protective incantations. Lena's heart hammered. Her newly awakened wolf senses fired like an electric current, urging her to fight. She hesitated, torn between the fear she'd always carried and the surge of predatory instinct telling her to defend her pack. Then she saw Ronan get slammed against a tree again, the healing wound on his side splitting open. Blood stained his bandages. Rage flooded Lena's veins. With a feral snarl, she bounded out of the circle, ignoring Celia's warning cry. Her partial shift lent her terrifying speed. She slammed into a rogue that was lunging for Ronan, knocking it aside. The impact sent them both rolling. Lena lashed out with claw-tipped fingers, raking across the rogue's hide. The beast yowled, snapping at her face. She twisted away just in time, adrenaline spiking. Instead of raw fear, she felt a savage clarity, each movement guided by an uncanny precision. She hammered her knee into the rogue's ribs, then struck with her claws again. The rogue staggered, stunned by her unexpected ferocity. A final slash left it wounded enough to retreat, limping off into the darkness. A second rogue turned on her, canines bared. Her senses flared, detecting a faint metallic tang from its fur, blood from a previous kill perhaps. Without hesitation, she crouched low and sprang upward, meeting its leap head-on. They clashed in mid-air, tumbling to the ground in a heap. As its jaws lunged for her throat, she jammed her arm up, letting its fangs sink into the thick sleeve of her jacket instead of her flesh. Pain tore through her arm, but she fought through it, ramming her free fist into the creature's muzzle. She dimly heard gunshots. Everett must be using silver bullets, followed by triumphant howls from the pack. The rogue that had her pinned reared back, startled by the commotion. She seized the moment, twisting her body to throw it off. It stumbled, and she scrambled to her feet, chest heaving. Before it could lunge again, a crossbow bolt zipped past her shoulder, striking the rogue in the neck. It collapsed with a strangled cry. She shot a glance over her shoulder to see Gabriel nod at her, crossbow at the ready. Across the clearing, Celia continued chanting, reinforcing the wards to keep more rogues from flooding in. Another shape dashed into Lena's peripheral vision, Ronan, panting hard, partially shifted, his face lined with determination and pain. He limped slightly, but kept fighting with savage resolve. They locked eyes for a split second, a silent promise passing between them. Then, as suddenly as it began, the skirmish seemed to end. The few surviving rogues retreated into the woods, their howls echoing in the night. Gabriel let loose one last bolt, catching a straggler in the leg, but it managed to scramble away. The clearing fell into a tense quiet, broken only by the panting of pack members and the whimpers of injured wolves. Lena staggered, partially shifted form trembling with leftover adrenaline. She glanced at her arm, blood oozing from a bite wound. It throbbed, but she could still move it. Gabriel and Everett went around, checking if any rogues were truly dead or just wounded. Celia rushed to Lena's side. "My child, are you hurt?" Celia asked, voice quavering with concern. "I'm fine," Lena rasped, though the pain made her dizzy. Her sharpened senses gradually ebbed, the partial shift beginning to recede. She looked around for Ronan, spotting him leaning against a fallen log, clutching his side. She staggered over, heart pounding anew. "Ronan!" He lifted his head, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. "I'm all right," he muttered, though fresh blood stained his bandages. "Guess I opened the wound again. Nothing serious." Lena collapsed beside him, pressing her clawed hand to his side, trying to stem the bleeding. "We need to get you back to the lodge," she insisted, voice shaking. "I can't lose you." A faint smile touched his lips. "You won't." His hand came up to cover hers, warmth meeting her trembling fingers. "That was incredible, Lena. You shifted." She flushed under his admiration, tears burning her eyes. "I couldn't stand by while you were in danger," she whispered. "I just had to protect you." He exhaled, relief mingling with the pain in his features. "Thank you." Celia crouched beside them, rummaging through a satchel of medical supplies. She quickly applied a poultice to slow Ronan's bleeding and examined Lena's bite wound. "We'll survive," she said grimly. "We need to hurry back before more rogues arrive." Gabriel and Everett confirmed the area was clear for the moment, though they could hear distant howls, suggesting the rogues were regrouping. The pack members supported Ronan, helping him walk, while Lena fought off the lingering dizziness from her own injury. She still sensed the wolf's presence within her, a quiet hum of power, not fully withdrawn. The partial shift had changed something fundamental in her, forging a bond between her human mind and her wolf spirit. They piled into the SUVs, leaving the clearing and the bodies of fallen rogues behind. Relief bled into apprehension, as Lena realized this was just a taste of the full-scale battle that loomed. Her arm throbbed, but her mind raced, replaying how the shift felt, how it gave her the strength to fight. She clung to that new power even as fear gnawed at her, wondering how many more lives would be lost before this was over. Back at the lodge, the arrival of the wounded triggered a flurry of activity. Marcus came running out, face ashen when he saw Ronan leaning heavily against Lena. He helped them into the medical wing, ordering the staff to prioritize their care. The doctor from the fore frowned deeply at Ronan, muttering about stubbornness. Despite the scolding, she worked efficiently to clean and stitch his reopened injury. Lena sat on a nearby cot, letting a nurse dress her bite, grimacing at the sting. Marcus hovered anxiously. "We heard the fighting from here." "Are you both?" "We're alive," Lena said. "We fended off some rogues. They know about the ritual, or at least they guessed we'd be vulnerable. But we held them off." Marcus's gaze flicked over her partial shift features. Though she was reverting to a more human appearance, the golden light still lingered in her eyes. Awe crept into his expression. "You shifted," he breathed, voice tinged with emotion. "You're coming into your power." She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but also a surge of pride. "It helped save us, but it's not fully under my control. I need to learn fast if I'm going to be any use in the real battle." Marcus nodded, a tremor running through him. "Time is short. Word is that the rogue leader has assembled a larger force, maybe twice as many as we fought tonight. and they're planning to strike within the next 24 hours. The pack scouts are falling back, trying to lure them onto ground we can defend." He paused, voice trembling with intensity. "We face an all-out war, Lena." She suppressed a shudder. War was a word that felt too formal, too final, but it was exactly what they were heading toward. "I won't run. I'll fight." He closed his eyes, taking a steadying breath. When he opened them, the alpha within him radiated authority and grim resolve. "Tomorrow night is the full moon. They'll likely use that energy to bolster their transformations. We need to be ready for them." He glanced at Ronan, who reclined on the cot, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "Ronan, can you fight by then?" Ronan met Marcus's gaze. "I'll try," he rasped. "Nothing short of being unconscious will keep me out of it." Marcus nodded, though worry flickered in his eyes. "Gabriel, Everett, and I will be organizing the defensive lines. We'll need you both on the front if you're able. Lena, your presence will inspire the pack, and your partial shift might tip the balance." Lena exhaled, nerves jangling. "I won't let you down." Marcus gripped her shoulder, a momentary fatherly gesture, then turned away to continue coordinating with the medical staff. The evening stretched on, a blur of frantic preparations and uneasy calm. Lena stayed by Ronan's side as long as the doctor allowed, helping change his bandages and offering what little comfort she could. By the time dawn approached, the lodge felt like a fortress on the brink of siege. Volunteers worked double shifts, hauling supplies, barricading entrances, forging silver-tipped weapons. Many pack members prayed in quiet corners or meditated on the grounds, steeling themselves for the onslaught. Lena slept in fitful snatches, visions of savage wolves and moonlit carnage haunting her dreams. Finally, night fell again, wrapping the mountains in a heavy cloak of darkness. The tension inside the lodge rose to a fever pitch. Marcus called a final assembly in the courtyard, where the entire pack gathered under torchlight and the faint glow of a rising moon. Dozens of faces turned toward him as he stepped to the center, Lena and Ronan at his side. "This is our home," Marcus began, voice echoing in the still air. "Many of you have lived here your entire lives, building families and friendships under the shelter of this pack. Tonight, a force of rogues, driven by greed and hatred, seeks to tear it all away. But they forget we are bound together by loyalty, by the blood of our ancestors, and by our unwavering resolve." A resonant murmur spread through the crowd. Marcus lifted his head, gaze fierce. "We will not yield our territory, nor will we let them harm our loved ones. Fight for our future, for our heritage, and for the new dawn we can create once this threat is gone." The pack erupted in a howl of affirmation, voices blending into a thunderous pledge of unity. Lena shivered, the sound thrilling and terrifying all at once. Her wolf side perked up within, stirring in response to the communal call. She felt a surprising flood of belonging wash over her. This was her family now. A hidden legacy she'd known nothing about until days ago, yet it felt undeniably right to stand among them. Marcus turned to her, his eyes reflecting torchlight. "My daughter," he said, voice low enough that only those nearby could hear. "Stand beside me. Our blood ties us, but more than that, our shared purpose unites us. Tonight we fight as one." She nodded, chest tight with emotion. Ronan, leaning slightly on a cane for support, took up position on her other side. Despite his obvious pain, determination blazed in his gaze. Gabriel, Everett, Celia, and the other high-ranking members formed a ring around them. The howls and cheers died down as a scout barreled into the courtyard, panting. "They're here!" he shouted, voice cracking with urgency. "A swarm of rogues at the southern edge of our territory. They'll be at the lodge in minutes." The adrenaline flooded Lena's system. She could already sense the approaching chaos, the undercurrent of hostility on the wind. Marcus roared to the crowd, "Positions! Defend our home!" In a rush of movement, the pack mobilized. Fighters took to the barricades and vantage points on rooftops, archers and crossbow wielders knocking their silver-tipped projectiles. Others, who planned to fight tooth and nail, began to shift into wolf form, clothing tearing as fur sprouted and bones reshaped. The courtyard filled with the thick musk of werewolf transformations. Lena felt the stirring in her body too, the partial shift beckoning. Her pulse raced, and she recalled Celia's guidance. Don't force it, that don't flee from it. She allowed a trickle of that feral energy to course through her veins, feeling her senses sharpen, her nails elongating into claws. She didn't attempt a full transformation, unsure if she could control it. But this partial state gave her enough power to stand on equal footing with many of the pack's veterans. Ronan stood close, similarly half-shifted. "I'll watch your flank," he growled, voice layered with a faint lupine rasp. She nodded, steeling herself as the first wave of rogues burst into the courtyard. Through the main gate they came in snarling droves, some fully wolfed out, others wearing half-shifted bodies that gleamed with moonlit muscles. A cacophony of howls erupted, answered by the pack's defenders. Silver-tipped bolts flew, finding their marks in rogue flesh. Claws and fangs clashed, the courtyard devolving into brutal chaos. Marcus, already shifted into a commanding wolfman form, led the forefront. He tore through a trio of rogue wolves with startling speed, the power of an alpha fueling each strike. Gabriel flanked him, crossbow firing methodically, while Everett handled a short-bladed weapon, cutting down any rogue that got too close. Lena positioned herself near the center, using the partial shift's agility to evade and strike. Every time a rogue lunged at her, she pivoted in a move Ronan had taught her, unleashing savage blows that left the creatures reeling. The smell of blood, sweat, and fear hung thick in the air. She tried to block out the screams and focus on survival, hers and that of her pack. Ronan, gritting his teeth against pain, dealt vicious swipes to any rogue that threatened Lena's side. Occasionally, he staggered, but he refused to retreat. Lena found herself simultaneously terrified for him and heartened by his presence. Together, they formed a fierce defensive pair. Despite the pack's efforts, the rogues kept coming. It seemed endless. Every time one fell, two more surged forward. The clang of weapons and the guttural cries of combatants rang through the night. Torchlight flickered, casting grotesque shadows of wolves locked in mortal struggle. A monstrous road, nearly 7 feet tall and half-shift, barreled toward Lena. She recognized it as the same scarred brute that had attacked her in the forest the previous night. Its eyes gleamed with savage triumph. She braced herself, claws ready. But this time, she wasn't the same scared waitress. This time, her wolf's side roared with defiance. She clashed with the rogue, her mind surging with fierce clarity. Their bodies slammed together, tearing at each other in a flurry of claws. The rogue lunged for her throat, but she dodged, raking her nails across its snout. Hot blood splattered her arms. It snarled in pain, swiping at her midsection. She twisted away just enough to avoid a killing blow, though it tore her jacket, leaving a shallow gash. Fueled by adrenaline and a protectiveness for her newfound family, she launched a final strike, driving her claws into the rogue's chest. Its eyes widened in shock, then glazed over as it collapsed. Panting, Lena yanked her hand back. chest burning from exertion. She felt a stab of horror at what she'd done, but also a grim certainty that this was necessary. Panting, she scanned the courtyard. Bodies, some still, some writhing, littered the ground. She spotted glimpses of Marcus fighting, unstoppable in his alpha fury, even though blood matted his fur. Gabriel and Everett coordinated attacks, systematically taking down rogues. The pack was holding, but the toll was brutal. Suddenly, a shout came from the lodge entrance. Celia, standing in human form, gestured wildly. "Look out! The main gate is collapsing!" Before they could react, a deafening crash shook the courtyard. A mass of rogues had piled against the gate, snapping thick timbers, and more poured in like a flood. Marcus roared, rallying the pack to form a defensive line, but the sheer numbers threatened to overwhelm them. Lena's heart pounded. A wave of fear threatened to unravel her focus. She saw pack members she recognized, those same younger wolves who'd looked at her with hopeful eyes, now locked in desperate battles. Some fell, snarling, to the ground. She wanted to help them all, but the fight was too widespread. Ronan staggered near her, struggling against a particularly fierce rogue with razor-sharp teeth. Lena leapt into the fray, ramming her shoulder into the rogue's flank. They toppled to the ground, and Ronan took the opening to slash it across the neck. The rogue went limp, blood pooling beneath it. Lena knelt beside Ronan, panting. He grasped her arm, eyes narrowing as more rogues tore into the courtyard. "We can't hold them like this," he growled. "We need something, someone, to break their line." Her gaze darted across the chaos, spotting Marcus in a pitched battle with what looked like the rogue leader, a hulking figure with bristling black fur streaked with white scars. The leader's presence radiated a dark aura, fueling its pack's ferocity. Marcus was clearly outmatched in sheer size, though he fought valiantly. Every blow the leader landed sent the alpha reeling. A dread realization struck Lena. If Marcus fell, the pack's morale would crumble. The prophecy's words echoed in her mind. She had the power to unite or to destroy. Maybe this was the moment she was meant to act, to step beyond fear and claim the full might of her heritage. Trembling, she closed her eyes, feeling the partial shift flicker. She knew a deeper, fuller transformation lay just beyond. Could she handle it without losing herself? The memory of the savage strength it promised both enticed and terrified her. Yet she couldn't watch her father die at the hands of a monster. She had to believe she was strong enough. "Ronan," she said, voice shaking. "I have to try a full shift." He looked at her, face pale. "You're sure?" She exhaled, meeting his eyes. "I can't let Dad, Marcus, fight that thing alone." A flicker of pride shone in Ronan's gaze. He gave a small nod, though fear pulsed in his eyes. "I believe in you." She rose, breath hitching. The carnage around her blurred as she focused inward. Instead of calling forth the partial shift, she opened the floodgates in her mind, inviting the wolf side to merge completely. Pain seared her body, far more intense than before. She cried out, dropping to her knees as her bones shifted. Fur sprouted along her arms, her face lengthened into a muzzle, her muscles rippled with new power. Every inch of her felt like it was on fire, but she pushed through, clinging to the emotional anchor of protecting her father and her pack. When the agony subsided, she stood on 4 legs, heart pounding in her chest. A swirl of scents, sharper than any she'd experienced, assaulted her. Sound reverberated in strange echoes through her canine ears. She glanced down, seeing paws where her hands had been, dark fur with hints of russet. Her mind reeled with the unfamiliar sensation of a tail swishing behind her. But she remained herself, her human consciousness still intact, coexisting with the wolf's fierce instincts. A primal growl rose from her chest. The mass of fighting wolves seemed to slow as she bounded forward, each stride filled with supernatural speed and strength. She dodged around lesser skirmishes, heading straight for Marcus and the rogue leader. Marcus was pinned against a stone wall, claws raking across his shoulder. Blood dripped from his muzzle, and his gaze flickered with desperation. Lena launched herself at the rogue leader, slamming into its side with bone-jarring force. It yelped, stumbling away from Marcus. She bared her fangs, a deep snarl rumbling in her throat. The leader snarled back, black fur bristling. Around them, the courtyard fell into a tense hush, as though both sides sensed the significance of this confrontation. Marcus slumped to the ground, badly wounded. Lena positioned herself protectively in front of him, ears flat, growling at the rogue leader who towered even above her shifted form. With a vicious roar, the leader lunged. She met its attack, jaws snapping. They wrestled violently, each trying to gain leverage. Pain erupted in her side as the rogue leader dug fangs into her flesh, but she twisted free, retaliating with a savage bite at its shoulder. It howled in agony. She didn't let up, refusing to allow it any recovery time. Fueled by the newly unleashed power coursing through her, she clamped her jaws around the rogue's neck. At the same time, she felt her father's presence behind her. Marcus, despite his injuries, mustered enough strength to slash the leader across the back. The rogue leader stumbled, pinned between the daughter and the alpha. With a unified snarl, they delivered a final blow that left it in a lifeless heap. A hush descended, broken by ragged breathing and the whimpers of the wounded. The rogue leader was dead. Whatever bond or impetus held the other rogues together snapped in an instant. Many scrambled to flee, no longer emboldened by the presence of their commander. Some dropped to all fours and bolted through the broken gates, howling in terror. Others bared their teeth but backed away, uncertain whether to continue a lost cause. With the leader gone, the pack rallied. Gabriel and Everett led a final push, driving the surviving rogues out of the courtyard. A few minutes later, the din of battle faded, leaving behind a battered, blood-soaked silence. The lodge grounds were littered with wounded bodies, both rogue and pack. Groans of pain and soft cries of relief mingled in the air. Lena stood over the fallen leader, heart pounding. Her wolf side roiled with adrenaline, but her human consciousness surged forward, letting her remember who she was. Slowly, painfully, she shifted back. The transformation reversed, and she collapsed to her knees in human form, trembling and slick with blood, some hers, some the rogue leader's. Her vision swam, exhaustion threatening to topple her. Marcus crawled toward her, still partially shifted, fur matted with red. He reverted back to human shape, voice hoarse. "Lena," he rasped, pulling her into a shaky embrace. "You saved me. You saved all of us." She clung to him, tears burning her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, the word a tender vow of connection. "We did it. It's over." For a moment, father and daughter simply held each other in the flickering torchlight, battered but alive. Around them, the pack gathered, some limping, others helping the wounded, all uniting in relief that the assault had finally ended. Ronan approached, staggering from his own wounds. He sank down beside them, pressing a blood-stained hand to Lena's shoulder. She turned, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Are you?" "I'm still here," he said, voice thick with emotion. "And you were astonishing." She managed a tired smile, heart aching with gratitude. She cradled his hand between hers, the warmth of his touch a promise of what might come once the horrors of the night were behind them. Gabriel and Everett began directing the survivors to gather the injured and secure the grounds. Celia rushed over, tears shining in her eyes at the sight of Marcus and Lena both alive. She muttered prayers of thanks, checking their wounds. Despite the carnage, there was a collective sense of victory. The rogue leader was dead, the invasion repelled. Epilogue of Resolve. Days later, the lodge stood in a somber reverence. Healing was slow, both physically and emotionally. Funerals were held for fallen pack members, and many tears were shed. Yet a new unity bound them. The threat that had loomed so large had been vanquished by a shared sacrifice, and by the courage of the Alpha's daughter, who had risen to claim her inheritance in the pack's darkest hour. Under Celia's guidance, Lena continued to explore her wolf side, learning to shift with less pain, forging a deeper connection with the primal instincts she once feared. Marcus's injuries lingered, but he recovered enough to resume his role leading the pack with renewed determination. He extended overtures of peace to neighboring packs, hoping to build alliances and prevent future rogue uprisings. Word of Lena's emergence as a powerful heir spread quickly, shifting the political landscape in unexpected ways. There were new negotiations, new chances for unity, paths that might fulfill the prophecy in a positive way, forging harmony rather than destruction. As for Ronan, he healed alongside Lena, their bonds strengthened by the battles fought side by side. In stolen moments, they found time to talk about the fragile, tentative feelings that had grown between them. It wasn't exactly typical for an Alpha's daughter and an enforcer to be entangled in a budding romance, especially with the pack's eyes ever watchful. But no one could deny they had bled together in a war for their home. Something deeper than mere loyalty blossomed between them. Late one evening, the moon shining bright over the newly repaired courtyard, Lena stood by the stone wall that overlooked the distant pines. Ronan approached quietly, still favoring his side a bit. She sensed him before hearing his footsteps, her wolf instincts heightening her awareness. She turned to face him, heart fluttering. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly, coming to stand beside her. She shrugged. "Too many thoughts. Memories of that night." She traced a faint scar on her forearm, one that would serve as a reminder of the rogue leader's bite. "Sometimes it feels unreal. I can't believe I shifted like that." He nodded, gaze drifting to the moonlit forest. "You were incredible. I knew you had that strength in you." A shy warmth filled her chest. She shifted closer, letting her shoulder brush his. "I wouldn't have survived without you. Or without the pack. Or my father." Ronan gently took her hand. "You didn't just survive. You saved all of us." The sincerity in his voice stirred emotions she once thought she'd never feel. Acceptance, belonging, love. She turned her face toward him, noticing how the moonlight silvered his hair, made his eyes gleam with quiet devotion. "Ronan," she whispered, "I thank you for everything." He released a soft breath, lifting her hand to his lips. The tender gesture made her heart skip. "Your father might worry about us," he said, half joking, half serious. She managed a small laugh. "He probably expects it by now. We've been through enough together." They stood there, hand in hand, the night folding around them in a warm hush. Lena felt the wolf inside her stir, not out of rage or fear, but with a peaceful acceptance that this was her place, beside her father, beside this pack, and perhaps beside Ronan. The prophecy's dark shadow no longer seemed so ominous. She had chosen love and legacy, forging a path forward that might unify a fractured realm of werewolves. In the distance, A lone wolf howled, a haunting melody that rose to meet the stars. Lena closed her eyes, remembering how that sound once filled her with dread. Now it resonated in her blood, a call of kinship echoing in every fiber of her being. She tilted her head back, letting that connection flow through her. She was Lena Rivers, the Alpha's daughter no one knew about, once hidden away, now proudly at the center of it all. And with the pack at her side, she felt ready to face whatever new dawn awaited them.